All right, folks, we're here at Mullins Music and Memories. Of course, that is one of our programs here on IBM.TV, where we do all kinds of great conversations with folks that are doing innovative things going on in the world and around like I said, here in the U.S. and around the world. So we definitely always enjoy having amazing conversations with entrepreneurs, activists, creatives, and a number of others that are involved in various aspects of our culture. And of course, we are paying attention to what's going on in the world. As I was saying on our earlier show, I was noticing that today a number of folks were having virtual classes. And within those virtual classes, of course, like with anything, there were glitches and hangups and things of that nature because we are having a new culture that is going on and folks are having to get adjusted to that and get adjusted to what that means in the new world and in this new normal, if we can call it a new normal, because like I said, a number of places that I have been involved with, including the Carolina Theater and the Hayti Heritage Center, have started doing events that are either on a smaller scale or virtual or a number of other ways that they are trying to stay afloat and just try to stay viable and still be very valuable to society and keep their doors open, but also still stay engaged with the community. Because, you know, in these days and times when so many of us are sitting at home doing our work from home, then we're having to learn new ways of doing things. And I'm glad to have as my guest today, and we may have some other guests that appear as well, but definitely if they come, they come. If not, we'll just have an engaging conversation with Jacqueline Dolly. And Jacqueline Dolly has been involved with a number of things. She is actually originally from the UK and definitely has things still keeps informed with what's happening in the UK, even though she now lives in New York. So she definitely spends most of her time in New York. She was saying that her friends are definitely saying that she is a New Yorker by nature, but as you'll hear, the accent is still very much there and is still very much involved. So Jacqueline, I'm glad that you were able to join us. I know we've been talking about it because you're doing so much work in like that entrepreneurship space and in trying to help people stay engaged in that space. So definitely tell our listeners a little bit about you, your company, and your journey to New York.
Yes. Okay. So you've already introduced me. It's such a great build-up, Mark. I'm so excited that I've gotten the verbal red carpet rolled out for me. So my name is Jacqueline, and I am a people development specialist. And by that, I mean that I work with people both as a coach and a trainer to help people to play their A game, particularly when it comes to their career, balancing their career and life. And as we know, COVID has been, I always liken it to a game of bowling, right? So if our lives were the pins, then COVID has definitely been a strikeout, right? A strike, right? So COVID has completely turned our lives around on so many different fronts, everything from the personal to the financial, and even to our careers, and how we define ourselves by our jobs. And many of us have found ourselves a little bit at a loose ends, and dazed and confused is the easiest way to put it, in terms of like figuring out where do I go from here with my career, especially if you've lost your career, either you've been furloughed or your job has disappeared as a result of this. And especially if you're in that mid-career to late career stage, right, it can be especially devastating because you've had so many years in which you've defined yourself in a certain role with a certain job, and that may not be applicable now. So I work with those people who are in their who either still have a career or have lost their careers, and I work with them on transformation. And that can be anything from preparing yourself to work remotely with your teams, because many people have not had that experience until now. And making that adjustment has been rough. It's difficult to work with people in person Never mind when you have that separation of distance,
Right.
It can be even more complicated to work with other people. So I work with professionals, helping them to make that adjustment and also to prepare for their next opportunity, whether they're in a job or currently out of a job and looking. COVID has given us an opportunity really to transform ourselves. It's level the playing field, Mark. So before it would have been a black mark against you just to have a gap in your resume, right? And not to have a job. Well, guess what? There are like more people in that basket now. So this gives everybody that opportunity to take stock, to look at their lives, look at their careers, and really ask yourself, is this where I see myself continuing when things have started to steady out and grow? Will there be opportunities in this area afterward? And if there are not going to be opportunities, what can I take from my career journey and reposition it so that I can do something else which is connected to what brings me joy and happiness? And having been a career transformation person multiple times in my own career, I can tell you that it can be done and that there are connecting threads in our lives and our careers that we can repurpose and reinvent ourselves. So this is a great opportunity to do just that.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I know I've got some friends that have been going through that. They've definitely been doing more gig work because I've seen a number of people that are working in the gig environment, whether that's working for some of the food kind of companies, and I'll go ahead and name them. That can be Grubhub, DoorDash, or some of those kind of companies, or whether that's working in the transportation field, like working with Uber and Lyft and a number of those kind of things. So we are seeing more people that are engaged in that, even in the restaurant and food industry fields. But then I do know a number of people that are engaged in this new normal. They definitely have become virtual employees, and now they're wondering, do they really want to go back to the office building? I mean, right now it's not even an option. They're in their virtual world. They're enjoying the virtual world, but they are having some doubts, like whether they want to go back into the office environment. So from your perspective, as one that is doing this kind of coaching, do you think that that's something that they should be concerned about? Or do you think that we will be staying more in this virtual reality for a number of months and maybe even a year or two, or maybe even this will be the new normal and the majority of our jobs will be in the virtual space? So as a coach, what is your feeling about that? What is your vibe about that? And do you, what kind of advice do you give folks when they're kind of at, it's not so much of a career impasse because they're still in the same job. They might still like that field, whether that's customer service, whether that's, data entry, whether that's whatever, but they are finding that they can do it at home, and then they're enjoying doing it at home. Of course, home does have its disadvantages too, because as I was mentioning to another guest on another show, sometimes, the food is calling you one too many times over there at the refrigerator. So the TV's calling you one too many times. So you do have to have dedicated space, and you do have to, kind of like balance yourself like you would in a work environment. So, if you have lunch at 12 o'clock, I'm thinking that you would probably say, even in the online environment, take lunch at 12 o'clock. Don't take lunch at 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, as some of us have a habit of doing when we're in the work environment and working from home.
Yeah. I think what COVID has done is to really catapult us into the 21st century. Because if you think about it, the way that our lives have been structured around our work is very much in that factory model, isn't it? And the same thing with school, where you have everything which has been designed around the rhythm of the work week or industrialization. That's how we've been conditioned. Well, technology has created this mobile, non-linear type of work environment that a lot of us were on our way. A lot of companies were on their way to moving or transforming how they work in that direction, but they were doing it really slowly. What COVID has done is to speed that up. It's accelerated at this incredible pace, which is dizzying. And so we haven't had that luxury of adjustment time to what the 21st century looks like for work. So we're firmly in it right now. So it's no wonder that a lot of us are a little bit confused and out of our depth and not really sure about where we go from here or whether or not we have the right skills. So the jobs that are coming in the future are definitely going to have more technical skills in your skill portfolio. Is definitely going to be one of the things all of us should be looking to add. Another thing that we need to think about is our people skills. So there are key soft skills such as communication skills, even things like this. So learning how to communicate and speak with people over video and different platforms, social platforms that bring people together. These are the skills that are going to be even more important, along with our ability to lead and drive results through others. So if you're not in that space right now, I would say to you, start looking at shoring up in those skill areas, because we're not going to be going back to the way it was. A lot of big corporations who may have been dragging their feet for the work at home culture now are starting to see the benefits, and they're saying, well, maybe we don't have to have such large overheads with so much square foot of office space. We don't need all of this space, and we can actually lower our overhead costs by having a much smaller office space where we have people coming in, like staggering their time in the office. So you're going to see more things like that, where there are much smaller corporate spaces with more people working at home, and they may be going into work a couple of times a week or maybe even a month. So that's going to be very different for us moving forward. And I think we're going to see more of it because companies have lost a lot of money. Some companies have made money, obviously, but there are companies that have lost a lot of money with this disruption. So they're going to be looking for, where can we save? So that's a very obvious savings. And if you're not paying for heating, right, air conditioning, lighting, and all the other things that you have in the office, and you have your people working at home and capable of doing the same work, why would you go back to the way it was? You're not going to. You're going to stay exactly where you are and figure out a way how to make this a long-term solution for your people.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I was just curious about is why do you think that in your mindset, and there's one that has studied this and is definitely doing this kind of coaching, why do you think it took this kind of like COVID disaster for us to move into this era of like actually becoming more futuristic and becoming more of like this future mindset? Because I agree with you that we've been in very much of a that old school mentality, and some people would argue that it's been very much 19th century and things of that nature. And that's across several boards, including our education system, our work system, and a number of other systems. I would even argue our political system. But why do you think that it took this to push us into the 21st century and maybe into the 22nd? So I'm trying to figure out, in your mind, why do you think that this kind of disaster, and it is a world disaster, is what took us to move there? Because it seems to me that we should have moved this way ages ago.
Okay. So I tend to think of it, and yes, there are downsides to it, but I like to use the word disruption rather than disaster, because I feel that with COVID, yes, there are downsides to it, and we know what the downsides are, but there are also a lot of good things that have come out of it. So, for example, we've learned how to appreciate each other. Who would have thought that you would be longing to go back to the office and to be around your coworkers, right? So people that you may have been saying, I can't wait for my vacation time to get away from these people. Now you can't wait to get back together with them. So we're learning the value of teamwork. We're learning how much things such as even coffee breaks, and informal discussions, how that feeds a creative process at work. There's a lot of things that we do within the workplace that we think is a waste of time or is unproductive. And now that you don't have it, you realize how much that was feeding your creativity and your innovation and your ability to come up with solutions. You know, you need other people to bounce things off. So we're learning how to do that again, but in a different environment. With the current scenario, working distanced from each other in a remote environment, we have to figure out a way of how do we stay connected in a way which can allow us to keep sharing and bouncing ideas off each other and creating solutions together. I think that's still a little awkward as we're learning how to connect without overdosing on screen time as well, which is a problem for a lot of us. We've been dragging our feet moving towards this simply because people don't like change. Who likes to change? Nobody, right? Even we all like being in our comfort zone, you know, where we have a lot of control. We're on cruise control a lot of the time because we've learned a certain amount of expertise and proficiency doing something. So it then becomes automatic behavior. Well, guess what? The only way that we can grow is when we either choose to get out of that comfort zone or something kicks us out of it. And right. COVID was a big kick. Yes. So COVID has kicked us out of the comfort, and it's allowed us to see a lot of things as well that we probably didn't see. So, for instance, you know, we have a lot of social protests right now around the race issues. Well, right. People of color have known that it's been here for a long time, but there's been a large part of the population that didn't know that or see it because right. They're so caught up in being busy that they didn't have time to slow down and to really see it and recognize what was going on. We have a problem with our healthcare system. Well, there were a lot of people who were in comfortable jobs who felt that this isn't going to affect them, you know, because they have health insurance through their employer. Well, guess what? Now they no longer have it. Now they're realizing what was happening to the millions of people who've been in that situation for decades, sometimes their entire lives, and how important healthcare is to our personal well-being, but our ability to build wealth. Because without your health, you really have nothing, right? You have nothing. Then there's like things such as debt, you know, the amount of debt that people are carrying. So there's a lot of things that I think have become very clear to a lot more people who now have been forced to notice it and to see it because they've found themselves in life situations that they never felt they would ever have been in outside of this situation. So I think it's been good to kind of lift the veil for a lot of us, and for us to realize, you know, how fragile our systems of well-being are. So I think that's a good thing. Sometimes you have to burn things to the ground in order for the phoenix to rise. So I'm optimistic that, you know, with this breakdown in many of these areas, and that's how I look at it, various breakdowns, I'm hopeful that we can build something better now that it's been raised to the ground. But we have to we need to have the vision and the will to do that. Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You got to have that vision and that will in order to make that happen. Mm. Now, I know for a number of years, well, there was two models. There was the model of, like, I would say my grandparents, I'm 58, but I would say my grandparents and definitely some of their generations before them, that it was one job. You were a farmer, you stayed in the farm. You were a farmer, and that was pretty much it. Then we got into this society of multiple jobs. You might have gone through those that were born in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, gone through like 4 or 5 jobs and things of that nature. As a business coach and as one that's a career coach, where do you think we are in that model now? Are we heading back to more of like people being in one job, or they're going to be 5 jobs, or we're going to have people that are going to have like 20 jobs in the course of their lifetime.
So we might even have 20 jobs simultaneously. You never know, right? With the new environment that we're in. So yeah, we've definitely left behind. I think that the boomer generation is the last of the one job for life generation, and even many of them have had, may have had a handful of jobs over the span of their career, but there's not going to be many people left who can speak to that experience anymore. There's no such thing as job security. So that's the first thing we have to get used to. There is no job security. The only security that you have is the constant reinvention and up-leveling of your skills so that you remain relevant and can continue to make a living, that you have skills that are in demand. That's the only security that any of us will have moving forward. Now, the millennials and the Gen Zs know this because they learned from watching their parents and grandparents, with companies that would downsize them and lay them off, that there's no such thing as company loyalty to employees. So what they've learned is that they are much better at negotiating and selling their skills. So they're not going to stay anywhere too long if they're not moving forward or getting what they need from the employer. It's going to be much harder for employers to engage and keep talent moving forward in the future because they're constant. If it's not right for them, they're going to move on. They're not going to stay like the Gen Xers, or the boomers. They're not going to stick around. They're going to move on. And I can't say that that's a terrible thing. What it means for the job seeker is that you are responsible for researching and up-leveling your skills and keeping yourself fresh and relevant to stay in the game. And the minute you allow your portfolio to get stale, that means that you're working your way out of the job market.
Wow. So you're working your way out of the job market. And another thing that I've noticed a lot of people, and I referenced it with some of the gig economy, but it does seem that a number of folks are getting more engaged in freelancing and gig work and things of that nature. But I sometimes wonder, how is that able to be put down on a resume? Because like I said, I know that I do a number of things that are gig related, but they're not always on my LinkedIn profile. And I don't know that they should be on the LinkedIn profile. So from your standpoint as a career coach, how do you get those things that are more freelance on your LinkedIn profile and things of that nature? And I'm just using LinkedIn as an example. There are other kind of companies like Career Builders and Alignable and others that are like in that business model of places that you place your content in terms of your job resumes and things of that nature. So whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Alignable, whether it's Career Builder or a number of them, but as a coach, what do you tell folks about placing those freelance things? Because a lot of times those are very much rewarding. They're very detail oriented, but they're also very fast. So I don't know if you want to list all 100 or 2,000 things that you might have done when they fall under like a model that's very much of a freelance model.
Okay. Well, the answer is there's a couple of ways in which you can approach this. So there are multiple resumes, right? So the one size fits all resume is a thing of the past. It really depends upon the job or the opportunity that you're going for. And then you list the experiences and the skills that are relevant to that job. So each person is going to have multiple versions of a resume depending upon how much gig work that they've done or consulting work that they've done. The other thing is to have less emphasis on the employers that you've worked for and more on the skills that you're developing. So it's almost like you're flipping it. So the focus is on the skill sets and not necessarily on the employer, because as we know, working for one or two people for a long period of time, 5 years is a long time these days.
Right.
5 years as an employer, people are looking at you like, what's wrong with you? Right? Because you've been there too long. And especially if you've been in the same role with that employer, it really does work against you. So you want to start thinking about the skill sets that you're working on developing as you move to each employer. What exactly are you doing in terms of becoming stronger in this area or more experienced? What are the cumulative experience and the wins that you have with each one of these employers or gigs that you can add under that skill set? Okay. Wow. So these are the things that we can do, and a different approach that we can take with the resume.
Okay, because one of the things that I've noticed, and this is just my own observations about not just my own life, but other people's lives as well, is that I've got a good friend, and we've actually done it. We've done consulting of like events, because we've both been in the event space. So we've consulted on a number of events. And one of the things we found is that people love to give free advice, but then when you come back at them and want to charge them, then they look at you like you've done something wrong, because sometimes you've given them the advice on the free side just as a way to sometimes introduce yourself to them, or also as a way to just engage that particular market or whatever. But I do know that a number of my friends, including some that are in the academic field, that's one of our big beefs, is we'll sit there and going like, look, we don't mind telling you about the model or how to do things. We've done them for years. Some of my friends have done even more than I have done, so they've got even wider ranges of experience. But they do notice that sometimes when it comes time to actually engage the community in getting paid, that's when folks get hesitant.
Yeah. And we've each got to decide for ourselves, because we don't want to get into that space where we're afraid to share information and knowledge with people. So you have to think about your knowledge work in two buckets. So there's the part that people pay for, and then there's the magnet part, right? So the magnet part is what you are open to giving away for free, to engage people, to get them to know who you are. So that's the magnet part. And it's not going to take anything away from you. You're providing value to others, which is one of the things we should be looking to do, is to provide value to others, especially during this time. If you want to build your brand and get people to notice you, that's one of the things you do. Then there's the other part. So there's the knowledge part that you sell, and being very clear about what that is. And there's a clear demarcation line between the two, so that there's no confusion about, what you are willing to give versus what people pay for. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Now, the other thing that I know has come up, and you actually alluded to it earlier, which is the whole concept of after 5 years, people are looking at your resume and wondering, like, why have you been in that field for a number of years or whatever? Now, there are some folks that have been in the field for a number of years, and they're of an older generation. I've got a dear friend who has been involved in a job for a number of years. I think probably about 15 or 20 years. She was recently furloughed, laid off, or whatever. So there is a possibility that she may look for some other jobs and everything. Now, if I'm hearing you correctly, though, people are going to see that 20-year gap of her working for that one company. And in some ways, they're going to see that as a negative, because she was working with that same company for 20 years. So how can she balance that? Because if she decides, and I'm not even saying that I know for a fact that she is, but if she decides to go back into the workforce as an older citizen, how can she balance the fact that there was a place that she was working at for 20 years, and that's going to show up on the resume that she was there for 20 years. So how can she balance that and still show that she has some sort of gift to give to society or whatever the new job might be?
Right. So for Gen Xers and boomers, 2 words for you: agility and flexibility. So that means that you can go into any job situation and show that you can be a continuous learner, and that your experience isn't going to be a barrier for you, or where you get stuck in your ways of doing things. Because what we're going to find within those two generations, and I think even for some millennials now as well, the older millennials, what you'll sometimes find is that your potential new employer could be younger than you.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of us get stuck on the whole age and experience and wisdom thing and think that our way is the best way, or that we know everything there is to know about a certain thing. Well, we have to be flexible enough to understand that there are always going to be new ways of doing things. So we have to be open enough to be able to learn new ways of doing things. So that's the first thing. And a lot of the times we're not, and that works against us in a big way. The other thing is, it's not about working for a long time in a field. It's if you are in the same role, that's what could work against you. So if there wasn't any real growth in terms of like responsibilities, or there's no sign of promotions, then, or the job hasn't changed in some way, then that can work against you, because people may look at you as being stale or stuck in your ways or limited. They see that as a sign of not much growth. So if you are in a job and you've been in a role for look for new things and activities that you can take on. Yeah. You don't want to be stuck doing the same thing for a long time. You want to look for new things that you can take on that's going to keep you fresh and relevant in the workplace. And I think that's what happens with many of us when we've been in a role, is that we're not looking to take on more. We're actually looking to reduce what we do. If you want to be relevant and you know that you've got another 10, 20 years in the workforce, then you're going to have to look for new things that you can learn.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that even brings up another issue that I'm curious about your take on this. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole concept of ageism, which also exists in the workforce.
Oh, yeah.
And things of that nature. Because I know that even in the banking field, and I don't remember the exact age, but my mom was actually serving on a board and served on a major bank board. And at a certain age, I think it might have been 65 or 70, she was basically told that she needed to that once she hit that age, she needed to step off the board. Now, I might get that in the early days of the banking industry, but it seems to me that that's another form of ageism, because we do know that people at this age and day and time are still very viable, still very much able to relate ideas and be still very expressive well into their 70s, 80s, and I would even argue 90s for some people and everything. So I'm just wondering, have you found that does exist in the workplace where there is still too much of the ageism kind of aspect? And what are some of the advices that you give to people when they cross and run into ageism? And I would also be curious as to what advice you give to folks when they run across sexism, which is another major ism that exists in society.
Right. So it's within the American youth is a big part of the American culture historically. It's a young country. This is a culture that has a lot of value and a lot of currency around youth and youthfulness, which is why we see things such as the plastic surgery industry, etc., is so huge. Is because, people tend to fear aging, and a lot of it has to do with becoming irrelevant. And it's more so for women, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen to men, but it can be even more challenging for women, who tend to reach that ceiling where they, companies start to age them out or try to push them on, sideline them. So for men, they become more distinguished as they get older. For us women, they just look at us as being old, and push us to one side. So there is that. It is up to all of us. There's a difference between age in number, and then there's youthfulness in terms of how you think, how you express yourself, and your ability to continue learning and growing. And if you want a secret of youth, it's your ability to continue growing and learning. That's it. That's it. If you open yourself up to learning, you'll always stay youthful because you're always going to be open to learning new things. So that's one of the that's one of the key things. That's the one and only secret, I would say, for remaining relevant is just stay open to learning. Keep looking for new things that you can do that's going to help you to grow, and that's going to position you to be relevant and valuable to employers. That's it.
Wow.
Flexibility and adaptability. That's it.
It's interesting you say that because as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about something that my dad told me and everything. My dad is just turned back in June 80 years old. So he turned 80, but he is
God
still
bless him.
very useful and still very much involved. He's an artist, a photographer, and does a number of great things. He still does some mentoring. Of course, he helps with my, I don't have any kids, but he helps with my 2 nephews in some of their education and everything of that nature. And I had teased him about the Fountain of Youth. You know, we're all looking for the Fountain of Youth. So I was teasing him. I was like, there's no way that you're 80. You've really discovered the Fountain of Youth. And I've got, don't ask me why, but I've got multiple social media accounts. And I hadn't gone back to that account that I had sent him the message at. But I went to it a couple of days ago and I saw his answer. And like I said, that was back in June. But his answer was that I could show you where this Fountain of Youth is and everything, but you might be surprised at what it is. And as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, that's probably what Dad was talking about, because he is very much engaged in just being learning, constantly learning. He's been learning since he was a kid. He's now 80. He still is always learning. I mean, he's always developing something. He's coming up with new inventions, coming up with new things that are different. And he's always trying to think outside of the box. And he's doing that even now at the age of 80. So in that sense, that might be what you're saying, is that if you do that throughout your life, that is kind of our Fountain of Youth. So it's a fact that you can be youthful and energetic even at whatever age. There's another woman I know that I think is 102 or 103, and she still gets around and things of that nature. That's Miss McLaughlin, but she still gets around the community and is still very much engaged even at the 100+ age and everything.
Right.
So I agree that as long as you stay engaged, then age just becomes a chronological number. It's not necessarily your vibe about who you are.
That is it. A lot of people stumbling around and they're buying pills, injections, all of this stuff. And it's just simple. Always be comfortable being a learner. A lot of us, as we get older, we want to be the teacher, and that's good. You can coach others. That's great, but also be prepared to be the learner as well. And sometimes that means learning from somebody who is younger than you, and, being able to reduce your ego enough to accept that you can learn from anyone, regardless of what age they are. And I think that to me is going to help you to become relevant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the things that you have learned yourself in the sense of either from mentors of your own? So who are some of your own personal mentors in the career coaching space? And also, what were some of the lessons that you have learned from folks that you have coached? So like you said, you can learn from others. So I'd be curious to know some of the lessons that you have learned as well, either from the mentors above, the mentors that you had ahead of you, or from some of the people that you have coached. So if you'd love to share some of those stories of lessons learned.
Yeah. Well, my primary coaches were my parents. So I will say first, they were my first coaches and teachers. And there are many things that I learned from them. My mother taught me strategy, so learning how to strategize and to rethink things. And my father taught me the value of hard work, right? And patience as well. So I learned that from them. I've had other teachers through time. With each job that I have, I'll have different people who have taught me some very valuable things. For a time, I worked for Terry Williams, the PR guru here in in New York. And what she taught me was the personal touch. So being able to personalize your connection with people and your engagement with people. So that was something that I learned from her. I've been able to learn from young people that I've taught. I love working with young people, and I've learned so much from them, mostly through a lot of the times. The young people that I've worked with have been what you would call at-risk youth. And I have been fortunate enough to see some amazing kids who have turned their lives around and get PhDs and travel to other countries because they happen to find the right program, the right inspiration, the right motivation. And I'm really happy to have been part of their journey. And I'm a Dale Carnegie trainer as well. I'm a certified Dale Carnegie trainer, and I've learned so much through the human relationship principles. There are 30 of them, which are so simple, but an amazing guiding force in my life. And, whenever I fall off track, those are the things that I gravitate towards. That's what gets me back on track and reminds me of who I am. So I would say to you that we have people that teach us all the time who are currently in our lives and moving in and out of our lives at all times. It's about whether or not we're paying attention to notice what they have to teach us. And I've learned even from people that learn things of what not to do. I think that's equally important, right? So even when it's been a difficult situation working with people, I can learn something from you. What should I not do? How should I not treat people? What would be the consequence if I do? So so learning again, staying open to learning constantly, being self-aware as a learner as well, and understanding when you're getting in your own way, because we all do that as well. And in terms of transformation, I started out my career in film and video production. That's what I did originally. And then from there, I taught film and video also to some of those at-risk youth that I talked about. That's how a lot of them reconnected with the education, because they learned how to tell their own stories. And that empowered them and motivated them to go back to school and to value education. From there, I went into PR, communications, and marketing, and I worked in that area for a good deal of my life, both for-profit in the entertainment field, with corporate entities in the nonprofit space. And now, I reached a stage of my life, and this was, and the one thing that I'm grateful for is that I'm not afraid to transform. So I know when there's an expiration date on something and where I need to go and do something else. And this happened for me in 2011. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2011. Yeah. And this was at a time when I had just given in my notice for a job too. And thank God that my notice, my employer rescinded my notice and gave me time to work on myself and heal myself. But I stayed in a job that I should have left. I stayed another 5 years in a job I really should have left because of fear. I was terrified of leaving it. And it wasn't until I realized that you can die a million different ways, right? I was terrified that if I left, my cancer would come back and I wouldn't have health care. I wouldn't be able to take care of myself. Well, I say there's 1,001 ways to die. And the dying inside while you're still alive is perhaps one of the worst ways. And that made me realize that I had to take a risk and a chance at a time where people thought it was crazy to do that because I had nothing lined up. And I had to take that risk to pursue something that would bring me joy. I didn't know how I'm going to make money off it, but I knew it would bring me joy, and that's where I should be. And that was coaching and developing people. And here I am, I've been able to make it work. And I'm looking for wood that I can touch. Let's say touch wood. I can keep my business going. But it hasn't been without challenges. And the reason I'm telling this story, Mark, is because there are so many people now who are feeling fear because of this pandemic, who may be feeling stuck, who may be feeling that there's no way forward. Maybe you have this sense of despair. I want you to know I've been there. And I've had to navigate my way out of that trench.
Wow.
And that's what I work with people to help navigate them out of these trenches where they feel that they are stuck. Because I know it's just on the other side of that mountain, that you've got to climb, is so much opportunity, but it's getting that energy and that vision to climb it, to scale it. So I would say to anyone who's feeling stuck right now with COVID, that it feels like this is never going to be ending, and that you're stuck, and that things may feel really bad to you right now, but have some hope. Partner with the right person to help you scale out of the hole, because it can be done. Wow. And you have enough knowledge accumulated over your lifetime and experience that you can repackage that and you can create value for other people. We are firmly in the knowledge industry generation. This is it. Even you're doing these podcasts. This is the knowledge industry.
Oh, yeah.
So think about what everybody knows, where they've created a level of expertise, whether it's through formal education or the school of hard knocks and life. You have expertise that would be invaluable to other people. So how can you tap into that and create something new and exciting and wondrous and valuable, both for you and others?
Wow, it's interesting you said that, because I was just thinking about even some of my own work environments and things of that nature. And I do agree with you that sometimes, and I've mentioned that on the various shows that we've had here on IBM.TV before, that sometimes you're too afraid to go for the things that you should go for. Because I know that there have been a number of times that there have been jobs that I was qualified for and could have gotten the job and things of that nature, but because of fear of failure or fear of non-success, you don't go for those jobs and things of that nature. So as a career coach, what kind of advice do you give to folks when they find themselves at that barrier? Because they are thinking that they have the skill set to be a CEO, and I'm just using that as an example, but they feel that they have that mindset, but then they keep knocking themselves down saying, I'm not going to apply for the job, because if I apply for the job, Betsy, who's got more experience, is going to get the job, or Sam, who's down on another company down the road, has got more of this experience that I don't have. So we start analyzing the people that might even be applying for the job, or might not even be in the job running. They might even be thinking about applying for the job, but we put them in our mind as applying for the job. And then we turn around and the job is gone. It belongs to somebody else. And then you're in that woulda, coulda, shoulda mindset of I should have applied for the job, or folks asking you, why didn't you apply for the job? Because they're seeing the person who has the job isn't doing what they feel you would have done, or isn't doing as good as they feel you would have done. But I do think that we sometimes knock ourselves down. So as a career coach, how do you address that, and how do you encourage people to get past themselves, for lack of a better way of phrasing it?
Well, we got to learn how to fail before we can succeed. And if you think about it, you learn to walk, Mark, because you had to practice. You first had to learn to pull yourself up. Then you had to learn to crawl. Then you had to fall down an infinite number of times before you were able to strengthen your legs under you and begin to walk. Well, life is the same thing. We have to learn to become more comfortable and embracing and forgiving of our failures, because that's how we become stronger, and that's how we learn. And I think in a culture where we fear failure so much that it creates a barrier for us to be able to move through it and past it, that's part of the problem. So it's rethinking what failure is. failure only becomes your story if you stop trying.
Well,
Then failure is your story. If you continue to push forward, and maybe you have to do something 20 times, maybe 200 before you get it right, before your ticket comes in, then it is what it is, because with each iteration, you become so much better and more knowledgeable and wiser and stronger. So you're growing. You're just not perceiving that you're growing and becoming better with the failure. It's just important not to repeat what made you fail the first time. So you can fail again a second time, but you have to fail doing something different.
Yeah. So you have to fail multiple times, and you have to learn how to adjust to that failure.
Right.
And things of that nature. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
I know that there's also, and I just want to come back to the aspect of women in business as well. You're a woman business owner and everything. There is that glass ceiling, unfortunately, that it still exists within the women business field and things of that nature. So I'd love for you to talk about that. I know that we're coming up on the 100th anniversary. Actually, we're past the 100th anniversary. I think it was a few days ago, of the suffragette movement and the women's right to vote. I personally, and I've said this on a couple of platforms, I think that we should have also passed the ERA, but we didn't, because I think that there needs to be equal work for equal pay. But that's just my beliefs, and I know that it's shared by many people around the country, but unfortunately it didn't pass the first time it went around. So hopefully it'll come back around in another cycle and we can actually see those things happening. But as a woman entrepreneur, how are you feeling about the glass ceiling? Do you think that it still exists? Are there ways that we can get past the glass ceiling? And how is it in corporate America? Because you're working as a career coach. So I imagine that there are sometimes that you are working with women that are trying to make it up to a certain level in corporate America, and they're running into that glass ceiling. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the glass ceiling from your perspective.
Well, I think as women, we face there are multiple ceilings, and it really depends on what woman, your economic status, your class, your economic status, your race. It really, your age, even. It really depends on that. I would say that women have probably taken the brunt of the COVID fallout. Because many women have worked in the service industry. That's where their jobs were. And so with the shutdown, the income and the wealth of women has been seriously impacted. Then there's the fact that women have multiple jobs, right, as caregivers, both for children as well as for aging parents. So there's that part of it as well. So women have been squeezed a lot by COVID, and actually have lost some ground, quite honestly, both career-wise, I think economically, financially, and just in terms of empowerment, women have lost a lot of ground with this. As for what it's going to take for women to regain that ground, I don't know. While we're still in flux with education, with childcare, rebuilding business, and it's not going to be the same as it was pre-COVID. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what that's going to mean in the long run for women. I know that entrepreneurship, it sounds like it would be the way out, and entrepreneurship is good. But then again, how many women are going to be able to find the time to balance that? If you're a single woman, especially in a family, and you're the main salary earner, and then you have children that you have to look after and older adults that you may have to care for as well, it becomes really difficult. So it goes back to reimagining how this society works from the government level right down. So how do we want to move forward? Are we going to build for how things really are, or how we have told ourselves things are? Because we've been telling ourselves a lot of lies about how the society functions. and how people work. And we found with COVID that a lot of that's become revealed, and we're seeing the vulnerabilities that have been there for all of us.
Wow. So yeah, we're definitely seeing some changes in the ways that people are thinking about things, and definitely the way that we're engaging in the way of the community and things of that nature. I was just wondering also, because I like to learn about the people and I have as guests and their history and things of that nature. So could you talk to me a little bit about, and I've got another guest I want to bring into the conversation as well, that also does some coaching as well. But I definitely wanted to learn more about your British background, because like you said, you grew up in London and things of that nature. London also had its history, which sometimes people forget about racism and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about that and how it has impacted your thoughts about even the Black Lives Matter movement and things along those lines. Because I do know, just from being a historian and a student of history, that London has also had some history around race relations and things of that nature. So I just wondered if you could add your perception of what's going on both here and there.
Yeah, but I mean, this was a colony of Britain after all. So a lot of the foundational culture, I would say, comes from Britain. And, you know, there was a time where the saying was that the sun never set on the British kingdom. It was that big in terms of the colonies around the world. So racism, to me, it's a little bit different in the UK, but it's the same animal, right? So a cat is a cat, right? Whether it's a tiger or a lion or a little kitty cat, it belongs in the cat family. Well, I think of racism the same way. It may look a little bit different, maybe feel a little bit different, but it's pretty much the same animal, right? The same species that we're dealing with. So I grew up in Birmingham, UK, which is the heart of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that's where you got industrialization from. You know, that's where the factory system came from. Steel. If you want to think of an equivalent town in America, it would be Pittsburgh. So if you think of the history of Pittsburgh, that's very similar to Birmingham. And my parents were from Jamaica originally, and they were British citizens in Jamaica because Jamaica at the time was a colony of the UK. And they moved with the Great Wave of Migration after the war. So the 20 years after the war, Britain was saying to the colonies, come on over and help us to rebuild, right? We need you. We need your expertise. We need your manpower. Come and help us rebuild our bombed out cities and infrastructure. And so they came and they helped to rebuild. And at the same time, we're being told that you don't belong, right? So it's that the complicated history with immigrants is the same, you know, here in the United States, you know. So the United States is like all immigrants, regardless of how you came here, whether you came in chains or whatever, you were not naturally from this land. So as far as the race, what feels different to me in the United States, I would say, to me, racism here feels like, you know, if you had a tap just dripping on your head, like a little bit of water from a tap, and so the drip by itself, it seems like nothing. But after a while, with that thing dripping on your head, right? After a while, it can drive you a little insane. Well, I think that's how I see racism here in the United States. It's this accumulation of indignities that are visited on people that in itself, one little thing in itself may not seem like a big thing, but when you put everything together, it's a lot. And, you know, when I moved here, the closest thing that I could think of equating it to was a system of apartheid. It's a system of apartheid where people don't really embrace it and call it what it is. In the UK, you've got either very overt racism or you have people living next to each other. So, right, and different races. So it wasn't as separate as as it is here. It really is separated out at every level of life here. So that amazes me. I kind of chuckle about it a little bit. But at the same time, I look at the promise of what this country is, and I look at what Black America and even the immigrants have brought to this country, and I'm just, I can't understand how America doesn't treasure it. It is the one thing that makes you unique. American culture to me is Black culture. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. It really is. If you strip that out, what would be America? You look at everything from the music to the fashion to this to that, the language, the rhythm, the cadence. It's all Black America. And I'm just like, why don't you all kind of look at it and see what it is you have? Right. You have something really amazing and rich that came out of something tragic, right? And bitter. And you still don't want to recognize it for the treasure that it is and embrace it and the people who have helped to create it and contribute it. So that's the tragedy of America to me, that it has the potential to be something really magical and special and really unique in the world. And it's just never quite risen to that vision.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I want to bring Sophia into the conversation as well.
Hi, Sophia.
And Sophia has a transplant also. Sophia is actually over which country are you at now, Sophia? So give us a little bit of your history and everything you're about. And Jacqueline is also about coaching and career coaching and things of that nature. So y'all share a little bit of that. So share a little bit about who you are and what you're about, and then we'll continue the conversation, because part of the conversation involves the fact of people transplanting to different places. Like I said, Jacqueline is originally from London, but now lives in New York.
Oh, I'm going to correct you, Birmingham. I've got to say, I've got to call it Birmingham. Yes.
Yeah. So hi. Yeah, I'm Sophia. I was privileged to catch a bit of that, and I was struck by some of the similarities we have, Jacqueline. I was born and raised in New York. I'm the first American-born child of Haitian immigrants. Right. So I have 3 older siblings. I'm 36 years old. So I was born in 1983. An interesting time because, we had the Dewey Decimal System in the library, but then suddenly there were beepers and then cell phones in university. And now look at where we are talking to each other from various places. So I was born in Nyack, New York. It's a beautiful little artistic town.
Yes, I love Nyack. Yeah.
Yeah, very diverse. It's changed immensely over the years. But I feel very privileged to have grown up there. We had something really, really special. It was quite diverse, and we all played amongst one another. Now, talking about recent events, it's easy to see how people can live side by side. But when you get down to it, let's just say the last 8 or 12 years of politics have really served to shed some light on people's true priorities and sentiments. About one another and their neighbors. So anyhow, I went to St. John's University where I ran track, and I earned a business management degree in the early 2000s. And my background was primarily in hospitality. I used to work in that industry quite a bit in New York, but I was also a teacher. So I taught history when I became a New York City teaching fellow, and that was very life-changing since at this point we had the internet. So it wasn't creating from a textbook. It was actually creating curriculum, not teaching students what to think, but how to think. And it was essentially relearning history all over again. So that was a really wonderful experience that totally set my life on a different trajectory. But the other one that did was also getting laid off from a teaching job. And I was pretty burnt out at that point anyway. But once I was laid off, I had caught the travel bug the previous year. And when I was laid off, I was like, well, why am I going to stay here on a $400 a week employment check? I'm going to go to Mexico. So I went to Mexico, and I lived in Mexico and Guatemala for some time. And then I came back to New York and, got kind of stuck in New York doing the hospitality thing again. And then I earned the opportunity to go work in Dubai. So I jumped over to Dubai in 2014, originally to work for a world renowned hospitality brand, but I wasn't fulfilled by that. So I went back into education and became a university and careers counselor and worked in Dubai for about 4.5 years. And then at the end of 4.5 years, I decided to move on to China for what I thought was an amazing opportunity, but turned out to be a disaster. One of my life's greatest teachers. That was exactly 2 summers ago at this time that I moved to China.
Right.
So I was there for a bit and learned quite a bit about higher education and different systems over those years. And so I was in China from August 2018 to February 2019. At that point, I moved on to Bangkok, and China was quite in, let's call it the year of the reckoning, because it kind of forced me to reevaluate my purpose and how I was showing up in the work that I wanted to do. So since then, I have been working independently as an educational consultant and career transition person. I help people to, let's say, further define, refine, and execute their purpose and mission-driven strategies in both life and business. So I've had a lot of great experiences doing so. And where am I now? So now I'm in Bali, Indonesia. It's nighttime here. Well, actually, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. I came to Bali 4 months ago, March. So that's 5 months ago already. Wow.
Oh, wow.
So yes, I made a very conscious and strategic decision as I saw the COVID situation escalating. I decided to come here. So yeah, I've been here since, and it's been a real privilege to be here. Not everything's sunshine and rainbows. Obviously, this is really an interesting time for us all to be alive collectively and individually. But I'm glad to be joining you guys today and part of this discussion. And I loved what you said about being a Jamaican immigrant and just catching tidbits of your conversation. There's so much interesting and important dialogue happening at this juncture in time. So thank you for having me, Marc.
I appreciate it, Sophia. Definitely glad that you could join us and everything. What has been some of the things you've learned in Bali? So what has been the difference about Bali during this COVID era as opposed to what you're hearing about what's going on in the States in terms of how they're dealing with it?
Well, okay. So at the time when COVID was first starting to gain traction, let's say, or make itself known to the world, I was living in Bangkok, and I happened to be consulting for a startup company. And it's all about optimizing human agency and solving the keys to human flourishing. So one of the things we were doing, this guy is like a quadruple major, very obsessed with data, using applied rationality, behavioral science, and decision making to optimize human flourishing. So I had a direct line to very detailed and accurate information about the potential of this pandemic. And also I was in Thailand, which has a high number of Chinese tourists every year. Right. So about in January, I started hearing murmurs about this virus, and it coincided with me joining this startup, which was really intense and very time consuming. So I just decided to go ahead and go to an island and really just throw myself into the work, right? Because I was like, I'm working remotely with this person anyway. I don't really need to go anywhere. Let's give this a go. So yeah, I knew quite a bit about the virus, and just talking to him, we made a 20-page COVID emergency preparedness plan, which I'm happy to share. And it just goes through all the points that anybody in their life really should have for an emergency. Because it's been proven time and time again, especially now in the good old US of A, that your government is not going to take care of you, right? It's really down to the individual and your personal agency in these situations. So I decided to come here just because I was kind of sick of Bangkok anyway. It's a really big city. There's lots of pollution. Riding the BTS, the SkyTrain, people are like this on a normal basis.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Just thinking about the virus, I was already like grossed out about being that close to anybody and touching strangers. I'm under normal circumstances, but about this virus, I was just like, I can't do it. So thinking about it strategically, I was like, Bali is beautiful. It's lots of outdoors, lots of nature. It's cheap. Also, there's an abundance of food here. There are rice farmers. There's tons of fresh produce being sold on the street sides. I won't go hungry here. So I decided, and my lease was over in Bangkok in March. So I was just like, you know what, I'm going to go to Bali. And it was the best decision I made. In terms of how they're handling it, it's been varied. It's been quite good, actually, because they followed suit and closed their borders and extended us visa amnesty for quite a few months. Now, right now, they've decided that we all need to get legal. So that's been causing a lot of anxiety amongst different groups because there didn't appear to be an immediate solution. But I think we found one, so I can stay longer. And they will probably keep the borders closed longer. So that means those of us who remain here are kind of, because Bali is still reliant on tourism, I don't want to say that they're, well, essentially most of their GDP is reliant on tourism. So we're the last you're really spending money. It's a very hard time for a lot of people. Because of that, lots of businesses were shut down, but lots of people have really stepped up in the expat and foreigner community to provide support and aid. But also these business owners a lot of them are reaching into their own pockets to continue paying their staffs. So that's a really commendable gesture and effort. And I know from my personal experience, this hasn't been all that easy for me either. There's been lots of ups and downs. So I'm really, really thankful to have found such kindness in the Balinese people. It's amazing to me in all my travels and how these countries, where I come from a very privileged background, they don't have to know my economic situation or my emotional, psychological. I have an American passport and I am far away from home, and that's a privilege in and of itself. But people in many countries that I visited are always willing to go above and beyond, despite how little they have, to help you. So I think that's very telling of the collective aspect. Now, on the flip side, something that really surprised me about Bali and had to settle, and is still kind of something that is confounding to me and sometimes infuriating, is that Bali is known as a very spiritual center, right? People come here to do yoga and do all kinds of things. But upon entering these Facebook forums and different things, I was really quite surprised to learn that there are just as many Trump supporters and a lot of racists and a lot of COVID conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers. It's best summarized in this article I read from The Guardian. It's about how, Bali used to be the center of coconut oil and retreats, but how the new age, like fringe people, have found their match in the ultra alt-right, right-wing conspiracy theorists. Like, they're just like this. They have a lot of the same theories that they are trying to oppress us all, and they are this, and the evil forces, and all this kinds of stuff, like the Bill Gates theories, the 5G, all of it exists here among these new age people. So it's been a really interesting discovery, and made for some interesting dialogues, which I don't tend to get involved in these crazy Facebook comment threads because that's just where some of the dregs of society exist. Yes. People are really quite awful on the internet, but at the same time, this is a time where we all need to find our voice and speak up. We can't just keep letting people run rampant. So there's anti-maskers here who don't believe that, despite being a guest in somebody else's country, that they should have to wear a mask because masks are effective. It's a lot going on. I do my part. I wear a mask. I obey the rules. Indonesia's been fairly good at handling it. And there's a lot of theories about why it hasn't completely inundated this place, especially when there was a high volume of Chinese tourists here in November, December as well. Some people have herd immunity theories because apparently many people who live here long term were very ill in November or December, and that kind of passed. Also, something maybe about the climate. Maybe there's something in the diet. There's different theories about it. Jakarta is very severely impacted right now. Like, the cases are growing there. They've had to shut down the immigration office a couple of days, but the island of Bali has, for the most part, been spared. And that's because of the measures they took. They shut things down. they closed the borders and stopped all tourism. And they were thinking about opening the borders again September 11th, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen because people elsewhere are not getting their things together. And you can't, like, we see what happens when you open too soon.
Right.
And it's just, it's appalling and shocking that countries on a small scale can't get collectively together to get out of this. And then if you can't even get the US or like Sweden or Brazil and people cooperating under their leadership, what chance is there for it to ever really go away as fast as it could? So it's good. Really,
Good point. I was just curious to hear from both, and this is actually a thought that as y'all were both talking, I was wondering about, because Jacqueline, you came from definitely that English kind of background to New York. You've traveled around the world, Sophia. I was a big fan of the Harlem Renaissance in terms of like history and things of that nature. And we saw a lot of people traveling around the world. Of course, everybody remembers the stories of Josephine Baker going to France and things of that nature. I think we were in a process of possibly having that happen again, meaning that there was a lot of culture from America going out to the world. Because I definitely agree with you, Jacqueline, that American culture is African American culture to a lot of degrees and everything. There are other aspects of the culture that might come from other parts of our society, but the brunt of fashion, the brunt of music, the brunt of a lot of things are definitely African American based and have been historically, whether that's jazz, blues, or whatever. But I am wondering if in the COVID era, can we see that new renaissance? Because I thought we were in the middle of a new kind of Harlem Renaissance, but now I'm afraid that COVID may have slowed things down because we can't. I mean, we can travel to see each other this way in the virtual space, but we can't necessarily do it face to face in those different countries. So just wondering y'all's perception of a new renaissance, a new global renaissance, a new trans-African renaissance, for lack of a better term.
I'm heartened by people like Sophia, right? And I think with the millennial generation in particular, that ability, I mean, they have that pioneer spirit where they are willing to dig up and go to other countries and not just go as tourists, but go there to live, like to get life experience by living amongst other people. And you don't know how happy I am to see that take off in the Black community in particular, that we're not feeling limited by borders anymore, and that we're willing to go to different places in the world and to put down roots and to learn and grow in different environments. So I'm happy for people like Sophia who are out there. Because if we are just exporting Black culture through film and through television and books, etc., and music, you get a very warped view of who Black people are. And it can be a very destructive view. So you need people to physically go to these other countries and to export the variety and the richness of what it is to be Black and what you bring with you in terms of value. So I am loving it that there's this huge travel movement in the Black community. I would like to see more of it on the continent of Africa, because I think that's one continent that a lot of us are not making our first choice. Because of everything that we've heard and how we've been brainwashed, and that's all of us, including me. We've all been brainwashed about what Africa is or isn't, and have not always been willing to go and learn for ourselves. So I am thankful for the new generation that is not afraid to leave and to put down roots elsewhere. Yeah.
Sophia?
So, yeah, it's really interesting. Well, I've now been gone for 6 years, and I'm definitely not the first to do it. However, you'll see in light of recent cultural events spurred on by the BLM movement they've given a name to it. It's called Black Sit, right? Some people are
Black Sit.
Yeah, some people are offended by that because they're like, why does it need a specific name? We're the same as everybody else. But yes, there is generally a greater movement because you have all these, the confluence of all these factors. You have social media showing people that it's possible. Like, for example, my work specifically, which was really galvanized by my work in international schools, is being a huge proponent of studying abroad because the cost of American higher education is just
it's astronomical.
A crime against humanity. It's like crazy. So even the UK is up there.
You're mortgaging your future.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the first way they get you. So I'm a huge advocate for that. And that's the work that I focus on helping students. I've now helped students gain admission to about 21 different international education systems. And then professionals as well. My life would have been wholly different if I knew about the expat packages that you can get for working abroad in a different country. This is a higher and sometimes tax-free salary, depending on the country you're going to. This also includes a housing allowance, a transportation allowance. It includes insurance, more vacation days, and an annual flight home, plus bonuses. That's way more than I would have ever made, unless I worked at like a really, really top tier school. Well, no, actually, I shouldn't even say top tier. I should say a highly privatized and selective school in an affluent area in the US. I would never make that salary, and they still working you to death. So I'm not saying working in international schools wasn't a hard job, but in education, teaching abroad is definitely, it definitely opens more doors to a higher quality of life. I just think the quality of life outside of the US is better in general, especially coming from New York. Jacqueline, you live in New York. It's so, like, I haven't lived there in 6 years, and every time I go back there, it's just so different, but it's so hard to say I love New York, and it's such a special, special place. But
and a tough place.
It's a tough place. It's a tough place. And I think, I only left when I was 30. I wish I had left sooner because a lot of things happened to me in New York professionally, personally, with the police and their legal stuff that really gave me some baggage that I packed along with me to my international living experiences. Being Black in America is a very unique thing. And when you go out into the world, you can't relate as easily to Africans. You can't relate as easily and directly to even UK citizens because it's just a wholly unique experience.
Well, Jacqueline, that's actually, you had me thinking about something, and a couple of things that you raised that I was wondering about. One of the things that me and Jacqueline were talking about earlier was the education system, and we're talking about how the education system, unfortunately, in America is based on like a 19th century kind of model. So as an educator, what are your thoughts about that on a global kind of view? Are they still based on that 19th century kind of view, or have they become more advanced in terms of the way they do education? Because what we're finding here is that we're still stuck in that industrial mode of education. A lot of it based on testing and kind of like that whole academic model that was perfectly fine in the industrial age, but we're in the new millennium, and I don't know that it necessarily works.
Some countries are doing it better than others. There are so many interesting factors that influence the type of education system that works and the type of education system that one can offer. First of all, there's the big one. It's always money, right? So you go to places that are under-resourced, and I'm just always really amazed how you can see a video or some sort of post online where there's somebody in an African village or Chinese village with just a blackboard, and they've sent somebody to one of the most selective universities for engineering, right? Some people will just always have that. But then in other places, like, for example, I had a really difficult time in China and Thailand because of how archaic their education systems can be. It's rote memorization. It's not about critical thinking. It's regurgitating facts. Thailand is the opposite. They don't want their people educated. I shouldn't even say this because they're in the midst of another protest and revolution, and they don't like these kinds of things being said. But the students there are being, wow, they're not learning. And they don't want them to learn because then they will obviously finally realize that the monarchy does not have their best interest in place. So I was like working at a university for a very short period of time, and these students would take 13 years of English and wouldn't even know how to say my name is by the time they got to university. And also, yeah, there's certain things in Thai culture and in other cultures in not failing students, so they get promoted no matter what. Then you have the other extreme in places like Korea and China, where it's super, super, super competitive. And it's test scores and put your head down and study. And what does that do to the human spirit, right? So there's the other aspects of not educating the whole person holistically and people really being able to be fully actualized. So no matter where you go, there's definitely issues. There's places like Finland who have been able to do really innovative things with their education system, but that's a homogenous society for the most part. Mm-hmm. So these people have generally a very similar cultural upbringing and background, and that makes it far less complicated to experiment and educate there, right? So the COVID situation has really disrupted education for a lot of ways in the best way. Right now, there are people telling us that you can't do this remotely, and then all of a sudden, yes, we can. So you've been fighting this whole thing that's proven to be better for your employees, proven to be better for some students. But when you're forced to do it, teachers have shown up and risen to the occasion. Some students thrive better from remote learning, but have never had that option. They've been forced to go to a brick and mortar school and fail there, but they're thriving in the home education system, working remotely and on their own hours. It's revealing a lot of things that are providing more very valuable data and evidence that the system as is doesn't work. Also, a big part of my industry is the SAT and ACT, which have a horrible stranglehold that is loosening by the minute on higher education and access issues, right? So these people are still trying to put this test. They've canceled their own virtual conferences, right? They've canceled all of their counselor conferences and professional development, but they're still trying to get students to go sit in a room and take a test. Now, many universities have been forced to step up and go test optional. Even all the Ivy Leagues have had to adjust their testing policies. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for access in the future? It's exciting times because these tests are not an accurate measure of intelligence or potential, but they've been shown to keep so many people out of educational opportunities at the higher end. So it's really interesting times. It's always developing, and the conversations are lit, as the kids would say, right? Like there's a lot of really powerful discussion happening.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because as I was telling Jacqueline, I think I might have implied it in a couple of our conversations, but I'm one of those people that's got multiple jobs because sometimes you have to have, particularly in the pre-COVID era, you had to have multiple jobs in order just to survive, in order to just to pay the bills and things of that nature. A number of the jobs were in the arts and culture and media field, and we know that those don't always pay the best. So one of the jobs that I had for survival purposes was working for a company called Measurement Incorporated, which is one of those test grading companies and of that nature. So I can tell you, as one that has done that kind of work, the vast majority of the people that are grading the test papers don't believe in the system. I mean, we're doing it because they give us a rubric, they give us a model to follow, but we also have a couple of fears that are going to be interesting to see how they play out in the COVID era. One of the fears is the fear of how there is bias. There is intricate bias in the fact that, unfortunately, humans definitely can read and interpret more of what the humans are putting down on the paper. So we try to interpret some of the responses based on where the student might be from. But there is a push to try to do more of the letting the computer doing the testing. And there is several issues in that in my mindset, because unfortunately, as you know, Sophia, being a teacher, computers don't know nuances. So a lot of times students bring in the aspect of their culture into what their answers are. So like if you're asking somebody, you know, and I'm just using this as an example, write about your favorite rapper, there's a good possibility that if they're from LA or New York, they're going to be writing about somebody that came out of that culture. And the computer's going to be sitting there going like, I don't know who the heck that is, and get a little bit confused because there's not enough of that nuance aspect of the grading in my mind and everything. So I think that I don't know that a computer will ever be able to fully grade the way that humans are. And even the humans are going to have some errors in their grading as well. But I definitely don't think that computers can do it as effectively as humans can, just because humans understand a little bit of the nuances of the human nature.
Well, testing, I just wanted to jump in here. The testing, the way that testing is social engineering.
Right.
You know, that it was designed in that way, and it was designed to be a gatekeeper. So it's like letting some people through and holding some people back. One of the things that I'm excited about is the reemergence of homeschooling. So you're seeing a lot more of that now. I mean, there were a lot of people that started to opt for that, including Black people with their kids prior to COVID. But now it's really becoming an option with more people getting behind this, because the kids who are schooled at home are doing much better academically. That's what's so crazy. They're doing better and passing the tests and doing what they need to do and getting into good schools at a much higher rate than kids who are going to traditional schools.
Yeah. What are you going to say, Sophia?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the homeschool debate, we're going to find out. And I love the opportunity to do so. I think there's so many positives to consider, but there's also others to consider that might, that are just very worth a mention, such as like social skills and different other things. But going back to your comment about technology, it's very interesting because I've been, I took up some coursework about a year ago and attended the 5th annual Asia Pacific Futurist Network Conference. So it's about a futures thinking, strategy, and foresight development, right? And a huge proponent of that is about technology and its role in helping us to make meaningful progress on social issues. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a company called Shaping Tomorrow, and the guy's name is Mike Jackson, but he's a tall white man. He has a robot named Athena, who was able to create this entire presentation for him in a fraction of the time, culling all these different resources from the internet. Now, Mark, you had made a comment about robots or computers, or rather artificial intelligence, not understanding nuance. But I think you have to consider that humans come with so much cognitive biases that if you haven't done intentional work on them, those are far more dangerous than having a computer who might display less biases and just have greater access to information to actually grade these papers. I'm picturing, just from the example you gave, somebody reading a university admissions essay, right? And this is a 70-year-old white woman who's worked at this university, which happens to be in a rural U.S. town, for 40 years in the admissions office. Now, she's come across many students in her career, but being that this is a predominantly white institute and given the cultural environment of this town, what would happen if she came across a student's paper about this rapper that you mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. Would she be intellectually and cognitively evolved and unbiased enough to be able to see the art in this paper and to understand the nuance and not be swayed by her biases that she might not even be aware of, that's questionable. I think I might trust a computer that has access to all of the information in the world to kind of be able to follow certain things and make sure this paper doesn't get lost in the first round. So it will be interesting to see what happens in how artificial intelligence is able to move past the fallacies that humans can't.
Yeah, I can see that example that you're using, and I can definitely see that bias, and I've seen that bias with some coworkers. So I can definitely see where you could be correct about that. I would just tell you, and then I'm going to bring up some other questions and some other topics as well, but we can still continue on education also. But I can also tell you that some of the greatest things that I have ever seen, and I hate to say this because we're told to basically, I won't say flunk them, but basically to like put them in a batch that is basically like considered the refusals and things of that nature. But some of the greatest essays I've ever seen from a creative standpoint were actually in that stack. So like I said, in my mindset, those students should get rewarded because they have been some of the most creative kids that I have ever seen. But, you know, because of the nature of the test, they don't think the test is serious. They don't take the test seriously. They, for a variety of reasons, they write some masterful pieces in terms of like fiction, in terms of poetry. I've even seen some great raps written, but they're not doing what the assignment is. So therefore they're put in like a negative category. But, and in my mindset, that's wrong because I think we should find a way to reward that creativity. And I don't know what that would be, but I think we need to find a way to reward that creativity and not just dismiss the creativity because the student is basically like, I'm not taking this seriously, so I'm going to write a novel. And I can tell you that some of these novels are equal to probably early works of Hemingway and early works of like some of our great literature people of the past. So I've seen some amazing things that unfortunately I'm told to put in this category of the stack of the not so much F's or anything, but they're like not doing the assignment as it was given to them.
Well, that's what they want. That's part of it. It's your ability to follow the directives that you're given because that's how they're training people for the workforce. So that's very much a part of it. Can they follow the directive?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So if they're not following the directive, then of course they're going to get in that negative aspect. You actually brought up another good question, Jacqueline. I was curious to hear from both of you because I agree that we need to do more in the African-American community and in the minority community of all sorts with reaching out to Africa and reaching out to the motherland. I don't know that I'm seeing enough of that on either aspect, meaning from the Black business owners going to Africa or the African business owners coming to the mainland or to the United States as much as I would like to see. But as both of you have done some world travel, what is your thoughts about how that bridge of kind of like trans-Africa development in terms of business is going? Because we know that a lot of times what happens in other cultures is there is a relationship between some of those countries and their pockets of society here in America. I mean, there's Italian-American communities in New York, in California, and other places. And yes, they are connected to Italy to some degree. And the same with, I would say, Jewish American and some other populations, even Chinese American, that might be connected to China. I don't see enough of that from the African American population to any part of the continent. So I was just wondering what y'all's perception of is that. Is it something that is happening or can it happen more of? Or how are you feeling that we're doing in terms of that bridging of that gap?
Yeah, I think countries like Ghana, who created the Year of Return, I think it was like last year in 2019 that started, where they're making it easier for the Black diaspora to come and settle and start businesses in Ghana. And also making it easier to give citizenship, right, and work permits. So there are countries that are moving in that direction. Is it happening fast? No, I think it's still very, very cautious. I think there are a lot of African people who are coming to America, and going to Europe and other countries and China as well, right, Sophia? In Asia, there's a lot of African people going abroad and learning and becoming educated and going back to their countries to jumpstart the economy and start businesses. So that cross-pollination is happening. Is it visible the way that Europeans are visible doing the same thing? I would say not. Does it have to be? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. But I do think that movement is happening. And you do start to see prominent people from the African continent, both here in America as well as in Europe, who are rising to the politics and business. African people in business in the UK have done way better than Black people from the Caribbean, right? In terms of jumpstarting business in their educational level. And you'll start to see some of the parallels here in America as well. African people who are going to school here, or first generation Africans in America, are doing really well educationally, and in business. So I think it is happening. It's just that we don't see it spotlighted much.
Yeah.
What was your take on that, Sophia? I'm sorry.
This is a topic that requires a lot more research for me to fully speak on it. But just from my observations, I was doing a Being Black in College webinar last Tuesday, and I'll do another one tomorrow through some organizations from the US, Accept and College-wise, right? So last week, the topic was Black and Abroad. And we were talking about studying abroad for a short period or for the entire duration of your undergraduate degree. And one thing that I have noticed in my travels is that there are far more African students matriculating in foreign universities in China, in Thailand, even.
Yeah.
Everywhere, there's a lot more African students traveling or spending extended time abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be for so many reasons, like the politics and the dialogue that has been planted and created and further cultivated by all of us, quite frankly, to some extent, is extremely complicated between myself, a Caribbean child of an immigrant, that came to the U.S., is very Black American, but I'm Haitian American, not technically Black American. And then there's African Americans, and then there's people from Africa. There's all kinds of interactions that are just not the easiest ones, right?
Mm.
There's still some gap in understanding, and I think that's part of the plan. Like we don't have as much solidarity as we can. But hopefully, I think a lot of the identity of Black folk in general in the world, a lot of it comes from the African American experience and the Black American experience. And I think nowadays it's becoming even more apparent what we can all do if we realize that these nuanced differences that we've experienced are just all part of the same beast.
Right.
Now, in terms of Africa, the politics, it's not easy. There's certain countries where very good things are happening, like in Ghana, right? The year of the return. But then you have another African nation, I forget which one, but they're signing deals with China and just selling off their resources once again for a nice new experiment in neo-colonialism. And we're just what is happening? What? 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Like, do you not realize what's being done? So in terms of our countries being colonized again and again, just in different iterations, it happens over and over again.
Yeah.
And until there's some sort of unity and a collective vision and like a shared responsibility for what we can achieve in the future, ideally Wakanda, right? It just won't happen. Like there's always going to be somebody who's waiting to take advantage, and there's always going to be somebody who will sell their people out.
Yep. Because I know one of the things that I found fascinating, and this is one of them times where I'm going to date myself again and everything, but I remember when there was the great influx of people coming to like Florida from both Haiti and Cuba, and was interested in watching the way that they were treated vastly different. And you had to think that was based on the coloration, because the Cuban Americans were very much welcomed into Florida and everything of that nature by their society. But I also remember a lot of the Haitian immigrants that were basically pushed back out into the ocean and not welcomed with any kind of open arms and things of that nature. So were your parents part of that generation that was coming in during that influx, or were you like a baby during that time, Sophia?
Yes. I was my parents' first American child. So I was born in 83, and I was nearly born in Haiti. And I sometimes muse about how different my life would have been if, English was not my first language and I did not have an American passport. Could have been a totally different scenario. And my next sibling, my sister, the middle child, was born in 78. So they came right before my birth. They did not come on a boat, but growing up as a child all through the 90s, there was a lot of stigma attached to being Haitian. In my hometown of Nyack, there was the Haitian hip hop posse, and they used to have wars with the Black Americans. And it was very anxiety inducing. I remember being scared to walk home from school, or scared to admit that I was Haitian, because it had this terrible stigma attached to it. Now, I think going back to the times that you mentioned, a lot of it had to do with, yes, skin color for sure. Right? It comes down to that quite often, but also fleeing communism, right? And what that meant for American society in terms of that. So the whole Haitian history and its impacts on America's development and its impacts in the world is something that is not taught nearly enough. People have a very limited idea of why the situation in Haiti as it is, and what things would have actually been like if Haitian people did not become the first democracy to actually overthrow slavery at the same
Republic.
time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So people don't know this, and they don't teach this for a reason, right? They don't teach this for a reason, and they've interfered and they've meddled time and time again, because the idea of Black people being sovereign is not something that they could stand.
No.
Right? So that's why they've constantly done things. Haiti did not finish paying reparations to France for their freedom until after the first Industrial Revolution. How is a country supposed to compete when they've been paying you for their freedom and property lost from 1804 in the 1930s? Right? So there's so much stuff that is purposely left out of history teachings to keep people ignorant and to keep them thinking along the lines of a certain scripted narrative.
Yeah, because I wonder how many students even know who Toussaint L'Ouverture is, of the students that you taught in the school systems. Like I said, I know about his history and a little bit about it, but I wonder how many of our students in the normal context would even know who that is.
Not many, but not many.
Right. And I've always said, just in terms, if you're looking at the two different hemispheres, like Haiti here, in the Americas, it cannot be allowed to thrive. This is just politically, it can't be allowed to thrive, because the symbolism of that around the world in terms of like Black people's vision for who they would want to be, it would be too dangerous. Just the same as how African nations, there will never be, I hate saying that, never be, but it's not allowed nations to collaborate. So you couldn't see something. I've always dreamed of something like the United States of Africa. I've always when is that ever going to happen? Because what a powerhouse that continent would be with all of those resources, right? That every nation around the planet is looting. Imagine what that could be if those nations just got it together and were able to work and collaborate with each other and to move past all of the cultural differences, right? Because that's really what keeps everybody apart, as well as outside influences. So to me, the key for Black people's image around the world to rehabilitate us and a sign of empowerment, it's Haiti and it's Africa to me. It always has been. just because
Thank you for that respect.
Oh, it has. No, it is. It is. What Haiti, if Haiti was thriving can you imagine what the Caribbean would be? If Haiti was thriving?
But why do you not say that about Jamaica or another Black population or country in the Caribbean? Why
because Haiti was the first Black republic, simply because of what was achieved. Simply because you didn't wait for somebody to issue a proclamation of freedom. You took it. It's that simple. And that cannot, it's a blueprint for freedom, both for the Caribbean, because the Caribbean nations, they're still not free. They're really not. Doesn't matter if they talk about independence; they're still under the influence either of the UK or the European powers or America. They're squeezed between those forces. Africa, same thing. African nations who said they're independent, they're still not free. They don't even control their own resources from the ground. Right. They're constantly at war. You've got these countries that have everything that every country around the world, they could put a stop to technology moving forward, if they could, because they have everything. They have all those resources. And yet they're unable to do that and unable to build wealth for their own people. It's designed in that way. They're not supposed to be able to control those things because it would change the balance of power in the world as we know it.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right about that. And I was actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking I'm actually a big fan and have friends that are of Puerto Rican descent. So I'm actually one of those people that thinks that Puerto Rico definitely needs to have some independence as as the other parts of the country. So I'm a big fan of Puerto Rican independence and think that they definitely deserve it. And I can tell you this, Sophia, that if, and then I've got a question for Jacqueline as well, but I can tell you that if there is a certain person that shakes back or keeps the White House, there's going to be an influx of people moving out of the United States. Because I've also heard from several of my friends that if we got to put up with 4 more years of a certain person in D.C., they're already planning to migrate somewhere. We don't know where, but there might be a big influx of folks moving out.
Well, there's the issue of voluntary migration, and then there's the very real issue of forced migration. I have a brother, and this is quite personal, but I have a brother who, due to some difficult issues that came back to bite him several years later, he's facing deportation to Haiti, a place he hasn't lived in 40 years.
Oh,
wow. He came to the U.S. as a very young boy and got mixed up in some things. The system is not designed to rehabilitate. We all know people who have fallen or succumbed to substance abuse issues, right? And they just lock these people up in disproportionate numbers in minority communities, but especially in Black communities. And if you do things enough times, it doesn't matter if you were selling nickel bags of weed, you might get deported. So this is happening to a lot of people. And this is happening to people getting sent back to countries like Haiti where they haven't lived. And it matter if, even if you served in the army in the United States, you will get shipped back. Yeah. So there's huge issues about, I feel very lucky to be able to voluntarily leave, but there are people who have given their lives and broke their backs for America and who slip up once and get no reprieve and are getting shipped back to some really horrible places or places where they can't survive. It's a humanitarian crisis.
Right, it is.
For them to get sent back to these places. So that's another topic we could talk about all day. So we all know, if this person is elected in November, people who have been sitting in ICE being treated awfully, they probably are not going to be able to hold on for 4 more years and continue to fight their cases to stay in the U.S., right? They had kids in cages a couple of years. I just can't even believe I say some of these things out loud at this point. Nothing surprises me anymore, but it's just shocking to watch from overseas what's happening and continues to happen. and the conversations. And there's just no explanation. I'm not a spokesperson for America because I don't know either.
Britain's doing, by the way, the UK is doing the same thing.
Really?
By the way.
It's not advertised, or it's not as widespread news, because somehow people think Europe is post-racial. And
and
I know it's ridiculous.
That's the question I wanted to get to, Jacqueline, about. I'm glad you brought that up, Sophia, because that's actually where I was going, Jacqueline, is the American perception of the monarchy is, the elderly queen, the royal family, whatever's going on with the various royal members, whether that's Prince Andrews, Prince Charles, whatever. But it's that whole royal family, and that's kind of what we pay attention to because it's what the news media feeds us. As one that is from that area, meaning from England and everything, and is one that still has ties to that, what is the perception of the monarchy from the common, everyday British black citizen? Because like I said, I know the perception we give, which is that the whole country just adores the monarchy. The monarchy is wonderful and all of that. But I can't believe that as one is watching from the outside. So I want to know your perception of what is the monarchy's belief, and how do people feel about the monarchy there in England, but particularly from the minority community, whether that's the black community there, black British folks, or like those that might be from other parts of the world, like black African members of the different African countries that now live in Britain and the Caribbean and vice versa, and the various other parts of the diaspora.
I think it really varies, and it varies across generations. The monarchy in Britain, it's a symbol of stability. It's like one of the few constants, right, of what it means to be British, is to have this line of royal people, right? And so while everything else is changing around people due to industrialization, technology, etc., people, mass unemployment, Britain losing its empire, the monarchy is continued, right? The monarchy has been that constant. So for a lot of people, it's that one thing that is unchanging. It can range from being a symbol of oppression for people through to, indifference. I think a lot of people now feel a little bit indifferent, and the more they mess up, the more demystified the monarchy is, and you see the human side of them and the things that they do that mess up. I think the more people say, well, they're kind of just like us, but not quite, right? Because they're obviously not living like us. But it humanizes them a little bit. And I think there was a little bit of hope when Meghan Markle joined their family, where people were saying, oh, it's like a new day and everything. But we all saw where that story went, and where I knew it was going to go, because the establishment is racist. It's very much entrenched. It's very unchanging. It's not just a race issue. It's a class issue. It's like race and class in Britain. So you get held back, yes, if you're black, but the white working class there are equally held back, because of class issues, which can be just as powerful as race over there. So I would say I grew up pretty much indifferent. It's interesting, it's colorful, it's something that you see. It's a tourist trap. It draws people there, it's something to talk about, but is it something that, I'm that interested in? Not really.
Gotcha.
Not really, no.
And Sophia, coming back to something that we were talking to Jacqueline about, and I don't know if you heard the conversation, but as you've traveled the world, what is the world's reaction? Because I know Jacqueline gave us her view, but what's the world reaction been to Black Lives Matter in the different places that you've been to? So I'd love to hear some of the perceptions you're hearing from China and Bali and some of the other places that you've been to around the world.
It really varies. I mean, people can make their best effort to be supportive for different reasons, but they'll never fully understand it, and they'll never understand how pervasive it is. And can you blame them for that? There's the saying, everybody wants our rhythm, but they don't want our blues, right? So as much as people love Black culture, listen to the music, you got people twerking in every corner of the world, which is not Black culture, just to be clear, but, right? Well, okay, it is. Whatever. They don't fully understand. So there's a detachment, right? And they don't really know what's going on. They have their own news cycles, right? So what's going on in the US? But BLM, as we saw, has reached many different corners, and we have a lot of supporters. There's been different collectives of communities, like, for example, in Bangkok, I have some friends who got some features and got some exposure because they wanted to highlight like racism and colorism is really prevalent in a lot of these different societies on this side of the world as well. So it sparks different conversations on different levels. In terms of here in Bali, the same COVID conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and people who also think that we're being controlled by evil forces also think all lives matter.
Wow.
Right? So there's a lot of interesting conversations about race that are being brought to the forefront. It's extremely exhausting sometimes. People don't understand that I'm not here to be your I'm educator, you have the internet. But then there's also people, it's just really like when the Meghan Markle thing happened, or when Donald Trump got elected, or when Obama got elected. You see all kinds of snakes coming out the grass. People that you grew up with, people that you had no idea really had these views or didn't honor your personhood in the ways you would assume. Lots of things get unearthed, right? So the BLM movement is no different. There's not the same conversations happening, which is why I'm so thankful to be coming on platforms like this and being really involved with my cohort and colleagues in the U.S., because being abroad at these times and not necessarily being there, there's a sense of survivor's guilt sometimes. There's a sense of like, well, what do I do? How can I be involved? There's re-traumatization. There's a whole range of emotions that happen every time something happens.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I can definitely understand that. Because even the colorism is very interesting, because you mentioned that, because I've become friends with a young Pakistani comedian. Well, she might be in her 30s or 40s, so maybe that's not considered all that young, but she's definitely in that, whatever that age range is. But she lives in LA, but she even talks about that being a Pakistani American. Like, I did not realize that in Pakistan and Afghanistan and some of those kind of countries, that something that I knew was very popular in our society in different times and phases was equally popular there. I did not realize until I got to know and talking to her that skin lightener was a big thing in those areas.
All across Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's a white
huge.
It's not popular, it's pervasive and it's destructive, you know? Like, this is a white supremacist world. It's not even just limited to the US. You can see the effects of colonialism and teaching dark people to hate themselves or not be good enough all across the colonies. You got people in Jamaica bleaching their skin. You have the fair skin products here, thin noses, straight hair. It's all
on the continent of Africa, everything.
Everything. It's all. Like, I hate to, people get really defensive about white privilege and when you throw around white supremacy, but if you cannot see how it has really shaped the way different, all of us,
all of us are infected,
not necessarily in the positive ways.
No.
Then you're just willfully ignorant at this point. Willfully, right? Because some people, like yesterday, I made a comment in a forum, and I never comment in these forums, but somebody posted a tweet from someone that said, if you are white and you're calling yourself a shaman, you need to post your teacher's name, share some of the profit with them, this, and that. And people were up in arms. But I got in there and I was just like, you know what? I'm a first generation American, Haitian American. what I'm going to say is that I've come to Bali, and there are more white people practicing indigenous spiritual things that have kept us alive for centuries, despite other groups' best attempts at eradicating us through slavery, through genocide, through all these things. So if you're practicing these things, you really have to realize that, first of all, I am definitely going to side-eye you. Like, why this too? You know, there's a lot of talk about decolonizing wellness, decolonizing spirituality, because it just seems like, not that people own these things, but there's never credit given.
It is a credit, yeah.
It's just appropriation. It's called Columbusing. Like, people put their hair in braids. Suddenly, when Kim Kardashian or somebody paler does it, it's acceptable and legitimized. Meanwhile, we've been terrorized for having natural hair at work. Like, it's just pervasive at every level of society that the standard for legitimacy has been white, and everything that deviates further and further from that is difficult for people to stomach.
Yeah, you got a point there, because I know one of the things that I know people oftentimes talk about is, particularly in this era that we're in now, because of the nature of what the world is going through, everybody is calling for unity, and unity across races, unity across people, and unity here and there. And I think that that is a good concept, and I think it's a wonderful concept for us to have in the world. And I definitely think that there should be push to have unity, but I'm also very realist about it. And I think that within that unity, has to be room to celebrate our cultures, which means that if you're no matter what the ethnicity is, like I said, Sophia celebrates part of her Haitian culture. I'm sure that you celebrate the various aspects of yours as well, Jacqueline. I definitely celebrate my African-American part of my heritage, but I've also got some family members that are very much in the Native American culture and definitely do the powwow. So I definitely celebrate that aspect of my culture as well. So I think that there has to be some ability to definitely unify and to work on unifying as we try to move the world in a more positive direction in the 21st century and beyond. But I also think that we have to honor our past and honor our culture. So I'm just wondering what y'all's thoughts are on that. That's kind of my kind of spiel on it.
Well, I like the idea of, I went through a training recently, and this was a racial justice training. And one of the things that they had us do right at the beginning was to, before we talk about who we are and our identity, was to acknowledge the identity of the first people here in this country. So it went as far as you had to go and do the research to find out whose land you were living on. Right? Like here in Queens, like, what tribal land are you on now? And as an opening to introducing who you are, one of the first things was to acknowledge, I reside on the land of, and then you would say whose land you were living on, which I found the whole exercise really empowering. But what it told me and what it drove me to do is to start thinking about shedding labels of black and white. Part of the destructiveness, and I also feel that black is equally destructive. Part of the destructiveness of white supremacy is that they have forgotten, they took on whiteness and forgot and shed their ethnicities, right? So their cultural identities, whether that was from Ireland, Italy, whatever that was, in exchange for whiteness, they gave that up. Okay. And they lost something really valuable. Even when it comes to connecting, the ability to connect spiritually with themselves than anyone else. I think that's a big thing. But I also think the same thing happens with us, albeit slightly different, with the label of being black. And it's not that I'm against using that, but it's also, it's black and, right? So having the ability to reclaim your cultural roots and to talk about where you came from and how those roots have shaped you is so critical. And we've lost the ability to do that. Therefore, we become all this blanket black term in America, where you have somebody like Joe Biden, I think it was last week, wasn't it, where there was a huge scandal about him talking about not much diversity in the Black community. And I laughed when I read it. I'm just like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? This is like, if I can find two Black people who think alike, that's a lot, right? And I'm just like, there is so much diversity culturally, just in terms of how we think, how we process things, our approach to life. And yet, because of the label of Black, people lump us together. And I think that's really, that type of erasure is really destructive.
No, I agree. That's very destructive. Yeah. And I know that event that you're talking about with presidential candidate Biden and everything was actually at the joint convention of the NABJ and the NAHJ, which is the Black journalists and the Hispanic journalists. I think I understood.
Wow, what an audience.
What an audience. I think I understood what he was trying to say. Just from being a student of politics and things of that nature. But I do agree that, sometimes if you can't figure out how to phrase something, it's sometimes best to leave it alone and not just say it. Because what I think he was trying to say, and this is just my interpretation, I'm not going to be a defense person in terms of being defensive for him or even pro Biden or anti Biden or whatever. But I think what he was trying to say was that as a bloc, as a voting bloc, the Hispanic community does have a habit of being more like that vote is more more of a kind of like group vote, meaning that like probably about 90% or thereabouts of the Black vote will go to the Democratic candidate, whereas the Hispanic community is a little bit more split in the ways that they engage the voting bloc. I think that's what he was trying to say. But like I said, that's not the way it came off to any of the journalists that were there. I watched it after the fact. And even when he said that, I was like, I can't believe you said that. And just had this look on my face as I was watching it on the, I think they did it on YouTube, but I was watching the YouTube playback and I could not believe that. But there were a couple of gaffes that he had like that. He also tried to tell a joke, and sometimes, as we know, jokes can work, but sometimes jokes can also fall flat. Yeah. And the joke he tried to say was actually a defensive joke, because I think one of the questions that people have asked, and it's a legitimate question to ask, and it comes back to what we were talking about, Jacqueline, with ageism and things of that nature, was whether he is got enough cognitive abilities to run the White House and to run the country and things of that nature. So he made the comment, the person asked him that, and as his way of avoiding the question, he asked a questionnaire who was an African-American man, had he taken a drug test. So he was asked about a cognitive test, and he asked him whether he had taken a drug test. So like I said, you're trying to diffuse the question, but in that time, humor was not the answer. You should have left that joke alone and just not gone there.
Joe's keeping it real, kind of. He was like, you know what? That's a risky one. Like, he doesn't have that kind of comedic vibe. You are not George Carlin, bruh. You need to. Yeah, that's funny.
Right. And the people, that's what's so interesting about America is that, even though Black people have been here for 500 plus years, pretty much from the founding of the country, people are still stumbling around in the dark to find a language to talk about race. To me, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. That still people can't find ways to talk about race without running into these gaps and these problems. So I don't know what the United States is going to be tomorrow. Never mind next year, right? Yeah. After the election, it's really hard to tell. All I just know is that there's all this promise here and that there is this amazing potential that the country is it's never even gotten 50% there yet.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. And then, of course, even on the political standpoint, then we've got the wild card throwing himself in. I think one of you mentioned Kim Kardashian, and of course, her husband Kanye has decided he wants to throw himself into the race as well, and nobody can really figure out why or what the whole purpose of that is. I definitely want to continue us engaging this kind of great dialogue, but we still got about another 30 minutes or so. But I do want y'all to also get a chance to talk about your respective companies. So, Jacqueline, if you would talk a little bit about what your company is, what the company does, and I would also like to hear from Sophia. Then we might get back into more of the global conversation. But I do want folks that are paying attention, watching, enjoying us both now as well as in the replays and everything to find out about your individual companies and how the companies are structured and websites that folks can find those companies at. So, Jacqueline, I'll start with you first. Tell us a little bit about the company, and then I'll go to you, Sophia. But start off with you, Jacqueline.
Right. My company is bedohaveresults.com. So this is a coaching and development company, and I really work in the space of transformation. So this is helping people to move through transformative points in life, whether that is moving into a leadership position, whether that's someone desiring to move to or to up level their career if they're feeling stuck in that middle ground of their career, or even helping people to transition out and do what I call a 180 with their career. And that's to move it in a completely different direction than what it's been in. And you can find me at bedohaveresults.com. And the philosophy of my company, I named it after a quote from Zig Ziglar. And Zig Ziglar coined the phrase be, do, have. And it's all about us first being able to be the people that we envision ourselves to be. So that's speaking to the mindset and being able to develop a mindset of success. And a way to support that is first to tap into the being or the visioning part. Then you follow that up with an alignment of what you're doing. And it's only when the being and the doing is aligned that you can actually get or have the results that you're looking for. And there were just 5 things that I wanted to just say before we move to Sophia. So there are 5 different ways in which people can up level right now while the economy is down. So the first thing is I would say to people is to skill up. So go out and do an audit of your skill sets and figure out what is absolutely essential for now and also the post-COVID reality. So a lot of that has to do with skilling up in technological skill areas. So that could be everything from learning how to use social media. It can be like learning how to do video editing, whatever has to do with technology, skill up in those areas because those are going to be critical moving forward. Then there's increasing your knowledge base. So do more reading. I would encourage everybody, look at podcasts, read more books, crack open a newspaper, whether it's the digital or the paper kind, and read so you're staying current with emerging trends and you know what's going on in your industry, because we are firmly in the knowledge industry era. And so what you know is going to be equally valuable as what you can do. Then you want to expand your circle as well. So this has to do with connecting with people, pretty much like how we're connecting right here. So connect on social media, but also start networking. People are way more accessible now than they've ever been in any point in your career. So reach out to people and ask to connect with them. It's very simple. Do a virtual coffee, whatever it is you have to do, but start cultivating and building relationships. And that means being able to offer value first. Don't just ask and take. Provide value, and value is going to start coming back to you. Then you want to be highly visible. So you want to be able to join different groups. And if you join a group, be visible, talk, offer information, don't just sit on the sidelines, but be visible in it, or even start your own group if you have to, right? And attract and build a community, because this is going to be valuable to you further on. And then the final thing is to embrace resetting your career, revitalization. Embrace it and look for anything that you can do right now to reposition yourself and renew yourself, because there isn't any other time that we have had where renewal is something that everybody is embracing right now, and where you're not going to be looked at as being crazy or aberrant if you do. So figure out what your next move is and embrace that renewal and revitalization. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate you. Definitely enjoyed learning more about the company and everything of that nature. Do want to hear from Sophia and what her company is all about as well. I do have to tease Sophia about one thing, though, because she did mention that she ran track back in the day. I cannot tell it now because, as I was telling Jacqueline, I've been spending too much time in the refrigerator, and this has been going on for a number of years. So I used to run track, too. But even when I ran, I was very bad. I was like the worst. I was the Charlie Brown of my track team, but I was, even back then, I was a good networker. So I recruited the other people that ran on the team, and I think we won 3 out of the 4 years because I went to a high school. It was a 3-year high school, but you could run in your senior year of junior high. So I ran 4 years, and like I said, we won 3 years. The year that we lost, I actually recruited somebody that I could beat. So I think that I might have been the reason that we lost because I recruited somebody that I knew I could beat. He's since passed on, but he was a good friend of mine. And I was like, I know I can beat Jimmy. And like I said, I think we lost by a point or a half a point. So that was my track story and everything. And then the other thing that I was going to share with you that was a track story was this was ages ago. So in my senior year, I think it was going into my senior year, I went to a journalism summer camp, and there was a guy that was bragging about how he was the greatest track runner and things of that nature. I was a typical high school kid at that time, so I bragged too. I was like, yes, I'm good. I'm the best that there is, knowing good and well that I was horrible at tracks. I knew that he was probably going to beat me or whatever. So I talked myself, and this comes back to something we talked about, Jacqueline, because I've done that as a big adult and as a little kid, but I talked myself into not running against him. I think we set like a track time at UNC because I was going to a summer camp at UNC, and he was in Upward Bound. So I said, I'm going to run against him, and I talked myself out of running. But then I talked myself into going down there like hours later. And when I got down there, there was a number of folks from multiple states that were there for this journalism camp. And I saw a bunch of my friends coming back, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go down for the race and everything, and, trying to put on a sense of bravado. And at some point, I'm like, so, yeah, head down. I know I'm about to get my hand handed to me. But I'm like, so I'm going down to the track race, and I'm getting ready to go take on this guy. And my friends told me he ain't here either. So apparently he was also maybe had been selling wolf tickets as well. So we both might have been selling wolf tickets, and neither one of us were there for the race. So those are my 2 track stories. So I just wanted to share that with you. But now we get to you, Sophia. And I'm sure you were a much better runner, probably were very good at the field, and probably were good at whatever event you ran. But that's my story of being just an average runner, and probably didn't need to be trying to run the mile or the 880, which is what I was trying to run. But tell us about Flip the Script.
Okay, so yeah, FLIP actually is an acronym for Futures Literate Youth and Professionals. Nice. And it's a coaching and consulting project born of my extensive experience in education, my coaching practice, and also my development of my own futures and foresight thinking capabilities. Now, basically, I provide bespoke coaching and consulting services to my clients, and they're able to design more powerfully adaptive and resilient business strategies, as well as in their career and their lives. I mean, for me, it's one mission. You're on a soul mission. And when you actualize, you're able to make the contribution that you're supposed to make in this world. So I develop a lot of different plans that delve into different areas of people's lives and the ways in which they want to improve. And hopefully, ideally, they're able to achieve alignment and be able to do purpose and mission-driven work. Futures literacy is something that I've become increasingly passionate about, and I'm putting special focus on expanding awareness and developing those capacities in my clients, and just in general, especially in the U.S. It's a capability that helps people to understand the role that the future plays in what we see and do now, right? So you can become more skilled at using the future and become more futures literate because of 2 things. One is that it doesn't exist yet. That's the best part about it. It does not exist yet. It can only be imagined. And 2, we're humans and we have the ability to imagine. So as a result, we're able to learn to imagine the future for different reasons and use it in different ways to create a better present, right? It's super important because especially at these times, you really realize how imagining the future generates some hope, but also a lot of fear for people. And we're constantly sense making and we're constantly trying to make meaning. So the futures we imagine shape our expectations, and they create disappointments, and they create the willingness to invest or to change, right? So basically, I'm working on developing these capacities with my clients, and I'm also working on some other projects in using these with university-bound students, because everything has changed so significantly, so quickly. They need to be more adaptive and more resilient than ever. And they are needing to use these foresight capabilities. We can't forecast anything. Forecasting is saying, I know what's going to happen. And that's ridiculous. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We need to be able to talk about plausible scenarios, right? And be able to pivot from those kinds of scenarios and create the desirable futures that we want to see. So this is my focus at the moment. I'm working with students and professionals, and I've done some work with some government agencies and some facilitators in creating awareness around this and helping different individuals, firstly, but also government organizations really think about what's next by starting now. Wow. So some things that are coming up is that we have the Being Black in College webinars. I'll be working tomorrow on imposter syndrome. So that's very interesting because that's a very, very relevant thing for me as well. People think that because you have achieved certain things in your life that you just have this confidence and surety in yourself, but it's shown that 70% of people are actually have experienced at least one episode of imposter syndrome in their life. We're also working on a really interesting thing here in Bali. We're going to put on some futures thinking workshops just to create awareness, because the tourism has all but been shut down completely and decimated. Right. And I came here and I realized that in the Futures Conference I went to that had a whole bunch of different countries, especially Singapore, who's led the way and shown how you can become a first world or a fully developed economy in just one generation. But Bali was not there. Indonesia did not have a contingency. So when I came to Bali, I wondered why. And it's so crazy that after COVID even, they're just still waiting for tourism to come back. And people want this normal. And I'm like, what is normal? So it's so critical on an individual level and within our little groups that we're in, whether it be our familial groups. You can use these kinds of strategies to plan your family futures. And I use futures plurally because there's not just one future for any of us. There's multiple. You can use it in the educational context. You can use it personally. You can use it on an organizational context. It's a really powerful methodology to add to your toolkit. So you talked a lot about upskilling. And that's what this is all about. We need to have like the Swiss Army knife of life and coping strategies, right? We need to be able to flip something out and be able to do it. So that's where I'm at as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And Jacqueline, lots of parallels in terms of just really zeroing in on what each client needs individually. Nobody is the same. We all have shared experiences, but they manifest themselves in our lives in such different ways. So it just really takes leaning in and honoring your past, leveraging your present, and elevating your future. That's what my goal is with my business.
I love it. And I love the emphasis on resourcefulness. I'm thinking about the word MacGyver came into my head. I'm just like, yeah, we have to learn how to
I know MacGyver.
He's MacGyver life, right?
Yeah, you remember he'd be in a blank room by himself and he still get out of there. I love that.
Right.
Well, I'm going to date myself because there was a MacGyver before MacGyver that had the same concept. It was the same idea, but like I said, I'm going to date myself here because, like I said, I'm in that upper 50 category. But for those of you that don't know, there was a amazing show. Most people know the cartoon character Batman and Robin, but around that same time was a show called The Wild Wild West. And in that, particular TV show was a guy named Artemis Gordon, and he was like MacGyver. He would be on some like some Western atmosphere, because, like I said, it was set in the West of the early America, and he would just mysteriously make something out of nothing, and then he'd be off the train, and you're sitting there going like, wait a minute.
How you do that?
I know.
Right.
Right.
It's true. Listen, this is the age of MacGyver. So it's just like anything goes. It's about creating something out of nothing, using that imagination, like Sophia said, and really going for it in terms of the manifestation of what you can create. It's all bets are off right now.
Because you use the word that I've heard a lot of people use a lot these days, Sophia, and that's the word pivot. Because it seems like everybody is pivoting left and right. They're all trying to figure out how to pivot. We were talking about that before you joined the call and everything. I was talking to Jacqueline about that, because I've seen a number of my friends that are trying to figure out how they're going to pivot in their next step. They might be doing work on the virtual atmosphere now and trying to figure out if they want to keep that job or if they want to pivot to something new, or even organizations are pivoting. I know for a fact that we've seen a number of organizations that have had to pivot even in the way that they are creating events. For example, I work with a group called the Eno River Association, and they do this Eno Festival. It's a festival outside. It's usually outside. It's usually multiple stages, multiple art vendors. And when I say multiple, I mean like probably in the hundreds, and definitely food vendors and all of that. But we had to make it a virtual event this year. So we actually went into a theater that was not being used that much, did not have any audience, and had maybe, I did the pre-recorded part, because part of it was pre-recorded and part of it was live on the day that they went virtual. So I did the pre-recorded part with about 3 bands, and then the other folks did it with like maybe about 4 or 5 bands, and then there was like 2 or 3 that were not either pre-recorded at the venue or they weren't there live at the venue, but they were recording from their homes, and they all melded it into one big evening festival. So what would have been usually a 2-day festival was made into a virtual festival. So that's the way they did it. They definitely highlighted the artists and did them doing a little bit of a presentation on their artwork from a virtual standpoint. And even the sponsors came as well. So the only thing that we didn't have that I can recall was I don't think that they figured out a way to virtualize the food. So we couldn't have the virtual food element, but the rest of the elements were there in the festival. And of course the food was mentioned, but there was no virtual food experience, unfortunately. But that's one of the things that we've seen. So even the festivals have had to pivot. I know that a friend of mine was going to do they were going to do an outside poetry slam, socially distanced, so limited audience. I looked online and it looked like maybe 20 people were there in the event. And because of rain, they actually did move it inside, but still the limited audience, still not as many competitors and things of that nature. And we're seeing that with restaurants. So definitely, whether it's poetry, whether it's live events, whether it's whatever, everybody seems to be doing a massive job of pivoting. So pivoting seems to be the operative word of society right now. So, how are you encouraging? I'd love to hear from both of you. How are you encouraging people to do these pivots, and what advice are you giving them about pivoting? Because I do think that the pivot is the main thing that everybody is doing now. So I'll start with you, Sophia, and then work my other way. So, Sophia, how are you encouraging people to make that pivot?
Well, we're each on our own respective journey. So first and foremost, you need to honor that, right? None of us is a monolith. None of us has come from the same place, and none of us are in the same place. So being gentle with yourself, because these are extraordinary times, is the first and foremost. Then getting very clear on what your values are. Like, if your work is not aligned with your values, you're not going to be happy, right? And if it doesn't give you the career capital you need, or meet your familial needs or your financial expectations, then you're not going to be happy. So really getting clear on your values and being able to kind of force rank what those things mean for you and the careers you want to pursue and how you want to spend your time. The number one thing for all of us is that time is our most valuable asset, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only thing we can't ever get more of. So if you're spending a whole bunch of time spinning your wheels and pivoting in this direction, but never actually moving forward towards being fulfilled and having your dreams actualized, then that was just a lot of time wasted. So not everybody's ideas of actualization are the same, and that's okay too. Some people will be very happy spending all of their time, for example, working night and day to find the cure for cancer. Okay, that's an example. But other people value, interpersonal relationships and would like to have a family and want less face-to-face time required for working for somebody else. So they're going to be trying to craft a different career that has different flexibilities. So there's a whole spectrum of values that one needs to consider before you start allocating your most valuable resource of time towards pursuing these goals. Then it comes with skilling yourself, right? It's interesting because lots of people have been spending a lot of time developing certain skill sets that in some ways will serve them, but they haven't figured out how to market those as transferable skills. Okay? You can't tell me that you spent 20 years in this job and that you have nothing to offer somebody else. You always, always, always have something to offer. It's just helping people to really unearth and feel confident in talking about what they have to bring to the table with an intellectual humility. Like, there's nothing wrong. I'm also not one of those people who places much value on always being right. None of us is always right. There's always room for growth, right? And that's where the innovation comes from, is from being wrong and trying again. There's the famous Edison quotes. There's all those quotes that talk about being able to try and fail and learn from those experiences to move forward. So those are my most valuable insights and observations that I've made so far in this time of COVID, working with professionals specifically who are looking to make transitions and pivot into something else. Some of those gaps are far larger than others, right? Some of those are big jumps, but it's not doable. You need to allocate what resources you have into getting a coach or getting a consultant or getting a program online. There's tons of free resources out there, but it can be overwhelming. There are many, many ways for people to get support, and it just takes resilience and the determination to find them, right? But in terms of with students, they're being forced to learn how to pivot really fast now. We talked about the education system and how it's not designed for people to think so independently and to try and fail and experiment. Like, you got 3 tries to take the SAT. All these grades are going on your transcript. At least academic experimentation in a lot of the systems is not wholeheartedly encouraged. So this is where utilizing the services of an educational consultant and coach can be really helpful, right? Because we're complementing what school systems are not necessarily offering in terms of we're helping students to very early define what their life values are and their non-negotiables are, and really helping them to begin very intentionally and meaningfully exploring the idea of purpose and mission. What's your soul mission? What do you want to do on this earth? What's going to make you feel whole and fulfill you? How do you want to contribute to the collective prosperity and our best desired futures? Starting that conversation early can have and does have profound impacts on the ways that these students approach their work throughout high school and the decisions that they make about where they go to university and what they decide to study at university and the reasons why they decide to study it, right? If these things happen much earlier, you'll find people more adaptive and resilient and able to pivot, but maybe less need to do so fruitlessly. They're pivoting in ways that are more productive and powerful and innovative rather than just trying to survive, right? They're shifting because their dreams and goals are getting bigger and they're moving forward and they've expanded their capacities and they have bigger hopes for what they hope to achieve and the impact and legacy they hope to leave. Those are the kind of pivots I want people to make. Those ones that are broader reaching and more self-actualized and more collective in their intention, rather than people just barely surviving and going from job to job because that's the way this system was built.
Wow. Sophia, I was just wondering, because just tough telling on one of the things you said, do you think that the education system is doing enough with teaching creative thinking and critical thinking? That's a better way of phrasing it. But do you think the education system is doing a good enough job of teaching critical thinking? Because I sometimes wonder about that. And I also wonder if we're teaching enough about like basic skills like civics. I know I've got a good friend of mine that feels that we should know more about civics than we actually know in the American system. But I was just wondering, as one that has been in education, what your thoughts are as to whether we're teaching critical thinking and whether we're teaching enough about civics and history.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated. You got amazing schools in New York, and you have very underperforming schools in New York that are not serving students. There's not one perfect answer to that question. There's so many conflicting factors that determine if schools are doing a good job with creative thinking. I would say, on the whole, there's a lot of room for improvement. Because, but we need to look at the fact that lots of education is student-centered and student-driven because of what technology does and the ways that we are connected. So how are schools adapting to that and utilizing that in the best ways, right? Education should be really, really personalized from the onset, because you have so much information about what people like and what motivates them and what drives them. If you want it, it's there. But if you're not prioritizing that, and little Johnny is supposed to want to care about the same things as little Susie from the age of 10 onwards and be tested the same way and all this, then no, it's not working. But there are people and there are movements to do it much better. So we talk about homeschooling. Maybe that's why these kids flourish, right? We talk about alternative schools. Trade schools are also a necessity. There are electricians making more than somebody with a master's degree who's working in social work. So why are we looking at those career paths as less than? As a society, that makes no sense, right? So there's all kinds of different constructs that need to be reassessed and reconfigured for us to move forward and help people just be actualized and develop their critical thinking skills in order to find their way to what they actually want to be doing.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. We're going to wind everything down, but before we wind everything down, I did want to hear from both of you if you had any words of encouragement or advice that you would like to give to those that are watching, either watching now or that may watch in the replays on our various channels like on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Twitch. So definitely if there are words of encouragement that you would like to give to folks, we would love to have you put those out there now. So these can be words of encouragement about life in general, about the career field. It's just words of encouragement that you might want to leave there, and I leave that open-ended. So I'll start with you, Jacqueline.
Right. So there's an African proverb, right? If you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. So I would say to you, you know, if you are looking to pivot, if you're looking to go in a new direction and really using this opportunity of disruption to start something, ignite and seed something new, I would really encourage you to look for your tribe, look for a coach. If a coach is the right vehicle for you to move forward, what a coach does is just save you pain of falling into the traps that they have already fallen into in their journey to get to where they need to go. So the coach is going to be the one who helps to save you from that so that you go much further along the path toward your vision. So I would just say that to you. Look for your tribe. Look for the people who can help you to go further. Surround yourself with like-minded people who are in the area that you want to get into, because we are the sum total of the top 5 to 10 people we know. So really think about who those people are and ask yourselves, are they in the area that you want to go into?
Appreciate that. And before I get to Sophia and everything, if you would, Jacqueline, give the website one more time where folks can find you and any other contact information, whether that's your Twitter handle, Facebook, or any ways that you want folks to reach you.
Right. You can reach me at info@bedohave.com. bedohave.com. So that's the email address. My website is bedohave.com. You can reach me there.
Appreciate you. Thanks a lot. Sophia, it's on you. Tell folks how they can reach you. Definitely those words of encouragement as well. So any words of encouragement that you want to give folks, no matter what they're going on in life. Like I said, they can be general words of encouragement or more specific. It's up to you as to how you want to phrase it. But I leave you to give us some words of encouragement.
Well, I really loved what Jacqueline said about a coach being a person who can help you navigate your journey because they've been there and done that. And especially in this day and age right now, since quarantine, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but everybody's a coach at this point. And there's people on my Facebook ads, I can help you make $10 million in your first week of business and all these things. And stepping into this space as an independent entrepreneur, you wonder, am I doing this right?
Right.
And what I want to encourage people to realize is that you're absolutely doing this right. There's only one you. And being at your most authentic is where you're going to make your biggest impact. So your past self doesn't really need you at all, but your future self does. We've all been on a long journey, and we need to honor our past because that's what made us who we are. But flipping the script is about changing that narrative and creating the narrative that you want for your present and your future, right? So it's about letting go of old stories about why we can't or shouldn't or haven't or won't, and just focusing on what we will do and what we have now, being grateful for the moment as well. Things are tough for a lot of people out there. I mean, we have all gone through our collective ups and downs and our own personal struggles. So it's really about just being authentic and utilizing the resources that are out there for you, connecting with people and honoring your past, leveraging your present, and leaning into your future. You can reach me, website under maintenance, but you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm Sophia Bazile at Futures Literate Youth and Professionals.
Sounds great. And definitely I'm hoping that folks will reach out to you. And you're so right about the fact that there are coaches, particularly this new normal, that are always trying to give us advice, sometimes advice that we don't necessarily want, because I don't know if y'all have noticed this, but we did get a couple of comments from different sources, whether that was Twitch or some of the other places. But I'm pretty sure that at least one of the folks that was making at least 3 or 4 of those comments was from that whole Bitcoin kind of community and things of that nature. So they were definitely trying to use us as a platform to promote the folks getting into that. So like I said, that's not something that I'm a big proponent of or a big fan of, but I did notice that they were there. So I think that we find folks that find ways to crash the conversation and put their own agendas out there and things of that nature. But that does happen no matter what the conversation is. But I did notice that they were there. There was some more legitimate folks, because I did see that Coyote 1201, that's their handle that they were going by, made a comment about BLM and definitely was given support to that community, and they didn't seem to have any other sort of agenda with their comments and things of that nature. So we did see that going on. So I do want to thank both you, Jacqueline, and you, Sophia, for being on the show. I definitely enjoyed the conversation. I think that we covered a lot of topics and gave a lot of things for folks to reflect on. Like I said, some folks were catching us live. We did get some hearts and some likes and some thumbs ups during the course of the conversation. So I did appreciate that, seeing that from my producer, Ankit, and from a few other folks. I saw that Ankit definitely made one of the comments, and did Lisa Long and a couple of other folks that were also letting us know that they were watching and were enjoying the conversation. as a part of the IBM.TV family, I can tell you that I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and you are definitely welcome to come back on either this platform or one of my two other shows that I do here on this network. So anytime that y'all want to come back on, I would welcome y'all to come back on and share your knowledge, share your skill sets, and also if there's just things that you want to let us know about or that you're concerned about, even what's going on in your life, Sophia, with your brother, if there's anything we can do to help in that dialogue and to help in that conversation, we would love to do that. So we do like to use this as a platform to be not just involved in the engagement of the conversation, but also in activism. So definitely that's one of the ways that I look at it as being is an activist tool. So I will say that to you, Sophia, and I'll say that to anybody else, Jacqueline, if there's things going on in your life that you are concerned about, we do feel that this is a platform for that as well. So do know that you do have this platform to share your issues, to share your story, and to have calls for action as well. So that's one of the things that we're very proud of here at our at the network, as well as just me myself. That's one of the things that I've done all my life. So definitely anything that I can do to help, just reach out to me. I can be found at bluesradio@gmail.com, and of course at these various platforms here, of course on LinkedIn and all the other platforms that are out there. So definitely I would say that as we continue these dialogues, I do welcome y'all to come back on whenever you're able to, because I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I thought that we covered a lot of great ground and a lot of interesting things that were out there that needed to be discussed. Speaking of interesting things, and just as a closing thought, I will tell you that I just learned, because I was watching some of the news briefs, that here at UNC, they have decided that all Chapel Hill classes are going to be going online because they apparently had some COVID cases. There were a number of COVID cases. So they were trying to do that balancing act of some online and some offline. But because of the COVID cases, they have now made that decision that all of those classes will be going online. And they're asking whether other UNC school systems will follow suit. But it does look like UNC in Chapel Hill that they are about to go entirely online because of having a couple of spikes in cases. I believe there were some at some frat houses and some other places. So they've already seen that in the early days of going back to school. So they've now made that shift to going online. So don't know if y'all have any closing thoughts about what's going on with COVID, but yeah, I can leave that as well. If you have any closing thoughts for about a minute or two before we get ready to wrap everything up. But I did see that was just announced. So Jacqueline, do you have any thoughts about how we're doing in terms of addressing the pandemic? And the same for you, Sophia, before I wrap everything up.
No, I just want to just leverage what Sophia said, because I thought that was great advice about pivoting. It's just look for the gap, right? So with look for the gap. What do people need right now? It's as simple as that. Look for the gaps of what people need. And even with this situation with education going online, there are going to be gaps and needs that need to be filled. And you could be the one who's filling them and create a business from that. It's that simple. Be observant, look for the gaps, ask the right questions, and then before you know it, you have a viable business idea.
Definitely. Any final thoughts on that note, Sophia? And then after that, I'm going to bring our ambassador up and the IBM.TV family commercial as well. But our ambassador tells folks how to wash hands and, cover your hands when sneezing and some very basic things. It's actually Ankit, our producer, or one of our producers, is his young daughter that we use as our ambassador. But any final thoughts before I bring the ambassador up?
Yeah, I would just say first and foremost, take care of yourselves physically, emotionally, psychologically. With this virus going around, I mean, without your health is your wealth. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Okay, so that's first and foremost. And then second of all, it's okay if you're not using this time to get a new master's degree, like the pandemic. Survival is all right. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself now and be kind to yourself always. However, at the same time, getting us through these difficult times is about beginning to idealize what we might want for our futures when things open back up and when things are at a new normal. What contribution do you want to make to that new normal? Do you want to go back to that same old job you hated before? If you don't, then maybe you need to find a balance between really taking care of yourself and being gentle with yourself, but also leveraging this time to make those moves that after this lockdown is over, you're just going to be living your best life, right? Don't go back. We can't go back as a society, and we should not go back as an individual to these previous scenarios that were not fulfilling us. So little by little, step by step, at our own pace that's right for us, we need to be moving forwards to the best futures.
Right. This is the time to be proactive. Not don't wait until you have to be reactive, because that'll be in the after. It'll be too late then. So this is it.
Definitely great advice given by both of you. I appreciate that. And I do think that folks do need to be very proactive. It's a time for us to be proactive, definitely, and things of that nature. So I agree with y'all on that. So once again, I do want to thank you. By the way, I was enjoying Sophia's backdrop of giving us a little glimpse of
I was loving that too.
Yes, so the light is like out now. This is the resort I'm staying on for now. Our Corona price is $200 a month.
What?
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, girl.
Maybe I'll be coming. Maybe I'll be traveling to Bali.
Sounds like there might be some trips coming to Bali very soon. I might have to make that too if that's the kind of price that they're talking about. But definitely, like I said, thank y'all. And here's the ambassador. And that will wrap up Mullings Music and Memories for this particular edition. And of course, on Wednesday afternoon, between the hours of 4 and 7, we've got the online dinner party. And I've got a number of great guests that'll be on that as well. And then, of course, we'll be back next Monday with more exciting guests. So definitely want to thank y'all for being on, and do know that y'all are now part of the IBM.TV and the Marc Lee family. So definitely consider y'all part of the family, and definitely look forward to continuing these conversations, both online as well as at some point or another, whenever we get back into a new world, being in a place that we can see each other physically and in person. That's what I'm looking forward to at some time or another. But right now, here's the ambassador.
कोरोना वायरस से कैसे बचेंगे? हैंड होकर और ऐसे अपने खांसी के बारे में ऐसे करेंगे, अच्छू अच्छू अच्छू, और कोरोना वायरस को धन्यवाद हमारा म्यूजिक सुनने का.
All right. That was her wrapping up everything. And like I said, I do appreciate the guest as always. And now here's a little bit about IBM.TV, and that will wrap up this particular show. I've got another 2 minutes before I've got to go to my regular podcast, which is the one that is on a non-streaming platform. So on Mondays, it's 3 back-to-back conversations. So me and Dean will have to find out who our guest is. I think it's a musician, but we'll find out how that conversation goes and where we take that one. But that'll be going on Blog Talk Radio, and that's Straight Talk with Dean and Marc, coming your way in about another 5 to 10 minutes. But here's the information on IBM.TV. The end broadcast button.